Welcome to the Big Boys Table. It's the name of the podcast, by the way. I'm joined by IskatuMesk, who is a longtime gamer psychologist and Indian salesman. We're here to talk about gamer psychology, Blizzard Entertainment,
Oh boy.
and I don't know. We can just piggyback off of what I was just talking about in the chat. I was talking about grinding and why grinding is fun for some people, why it's rewarding. Maybe you could speak to this since you're in the middle of doing World of Warcraft related content. So
Well, grind applies to so many different things. I mean, almost every single game out there right now amounts to grind. So I guess it really you're gonna need some more specific context and what kind of grind you're actually referring to.
well, there's a large number of grinding that goes for just unlocking um, the ability to get gear. So gear check is often something that's used in World of Warcraft or in MMOs in general, to my knowledge. And you have to grind to get gear that's good enough. You have to grind to get levels so you can equip that gear. You have to grind to get certain talents in your talent tree or whatever. I'm not super well versed on how the high end mechanics work. I only know how like the gaming experience is from level 1 to 20 because that's what I most recently played. I don't know what they've changed since vanilla about like the talent system or whatever they call it now, like class specification or specialization.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that actually requires its own sub level of leveling up grinding now. Like maybe they have like masteries or something you can do. But
Well, I can run through it a little bit.
sure.
So this is just speaking from Legion release. I haven't really looked too in depth into the changes since Legion came out, but talents are just level restricted. So World of
Okay.
Warcraft used to have a talent tree, and now it just has you choose 1 out of 3 in a list. So they really dumbed it down as much as they could because you kind of had the same thing going on that you had in League of Legends, where you had like a bunch of choices, but there was always an optimal choice, and Blizzard just gave up on even trying to balance it because they threw like hundreds of thousands of developers at it over the years, and nobody knew anything or really played the game. So they just were like, yeah, whatever. Let's just give them a couple of choices, and there's more than likely still like the perfect builds for this and that. So that's all level locked though. You don't really grind that. It's really easy to level in those games. And from what I understand, they've made leveling a lot easier. Although I guess it really depends on what you're using to level, but everything is like level scaled now, and you just basically just sit in Zul'Farrak and have you run you through that all day, and you'll just be, ready to go. The gear stuff is, oh man, if I even get into that in Legion, it's going to be ridiculous because of the amount of grind they threw into that. Because before in World of Warcraft, like let's say back in Classic, you had a pretty staple set of progression, and it wasn't really like as much of a gear check as it was just like an intelligence check. Like you could go into many of the higher end raids with like a kind of a hodgepodge group, but obviously you might struggle in some of the fights like Patchwork, very DPS intensive. But it was pretty simple. You kill a boss, you get gear, that's it. Maybe you get screwed by the seed for the gear drop, and you have to kill a boss, God knows how many times. But in Legion, it's even more retarded because if you go over to Wowhead and look up items from the Legion bosses right now, the drops you get are all personal. It's personal loot, and it's basically sold as you get loot that's just for you, so you don't have to, be disenchanting items all the time, except you often will get nothing. And the loot's based on your current item level, so in order to actually be optimally geared, you have to grind up your item level and then hope that you get a good item with good secondary stats and a socket in it. So obviously I'm
what
going to go
happened
into
to
more detail in that in one of my videos, but it's a lot to summarize, but it's a mess.
what happened to rolling for loot that was just dropped?
Yeah, that's gone. That's gone. All that's gone.
So now they just drop everybody their own like special
Basically,
snowflake loot or
you know
whatever.
how in Mythos, maybe you haven't played it, but basically Mythos was like, like a side project for a company who I think some staff may have been from Blizzard. And basically Blizzard ripped off of Mythos 1-for-1. And Mythos came out with the whole concept of whatever drops is basically phased to you. Only you see it, only you can pick it up. And now Diablo 3 does that. Like a legendary item drops, it's only you can see it, you can pick it up and drop it, and someone else can pick it up. But World of Warcraft was basically like you had soul binding. If someone picked it up, they couldn't trade it forever until they added in the ability to trade between for like 1 to 2 hours or something like that after the item's dropped. Anyone else who's in the raid can trade it. I'm not actually 100% sure if you can do that. I think you can still do that with some of the loot, at least in Mists of Pandaria. I'm not so sure about other locations, but because I didn't really do too much raiding outside of LFR at that stage. But yeah, so a boss drops, everybody loots it on their own, and generally the boss just has gold on it. But for some players, they may have an item on it. There is a item, I don't know about current raids, but in previous, within like Warlords or Draenor and Mists of Pandaria, you could grant something like called a Seal of Fate or whatever. It gave you basically another RNG chance for a piece of loot to drop off of the boss. And speaking from experience, the chance was very low. And that loot was based on what your specification was in your loot. You had like a drop-down menu that says, am I rolling for tank? Am I rolling for DPS? If it's applicable to your class. And then you can only get loot out of that table for that boss. So you'll never get something you can use for like an off-spec or whatever. And
so you were actually getting items that were specific not only to your class, but you had some say in the matter for what you wanted to roll for. And this is all instanced based, like it's phased to your character's instance.
So the concept, seems decent, but it's also really, really, really biased to the size of the raid. I think the boss can only drop so much. At least, when we were like duoing Mists of Pandaria raids, you would get no loot from half the bosses. There would be nothing because you don't have enough players in the raid for the system to actually give you items, and you couldn't actually change this. Now, Blizzard very, very recently said they're going to have some system in place which says, oh, you're like 10 levels above this raid, so now we're going to default to a not retarded loot system. It's taken them, however many years to do that. But if you're still in a proper raid doing proper content, then yeah, you can't really do that. So, but really the thing about the loot and the grind in that game is, if you really want to talk about the kind of time or commitment it takes to get pieces of gear, I like to look back to when I was doing Wrath of the Lich King, which is what many people, have told me, this is my favorite expansion. These are my favorite raids. So I go into Ice Crown Citadel. I've got a Frost Death Knight. I've got 232 weapons, dual wielding. And I raided on that character for about half a year, until the next expansion came out. And never once did a weapon drop for me out of 10 or 25 man that I could use. That was an upgrade. Because the bosses can only drop like 2 to 4 pieces of gear. And since it's based on the seed of whoever formed the raid, which people weren't really familiar with back then, there's a good chance that you're just never going to actually see something drop that you need. So there's plenty of weapons I could have used. None of them ever dropped. There's many guilds who raided, Molten Core for however long they never saw an Eye of Ragnaros or Bindings for Thunder Fury. I've seen Bindings for Thunder Fury, both bindings drop in the same run twice in a row. I think I've got about over a dozen bindings just laying around on my characters. I've got about 3 or 4 Thunder Furies. Like, basically, you get screwed by RNG, or RNG's really in your favor. And that's all like completely outside of your control. It's all under the hood. And the bosses just don't really drop a lot of gear. And Blizzard occasionally experimented with a few things where you can, turn in certain things or trade items or whatever, like in Sunwell, for example. But they really dialed back on a lot of this stuff. They bounced around with this currency called Badges of Honor, Badges of Valor. Basically, you can only grind so much of the higher end currency every week, and then it time gates you. And basically, you can only be so good. You can only get so much because, hypothetically speaking, and this is the way it is in Final Fantasy 14, if you want to get gear and you kill the boss and you don't get the gear, it's like, well, just kill the boss again. Get another drop. And eventually you're going to get something you want. Right. Can't do that in World of Warcraft. It's all time gated.
So there's like a minimum amount of time you have to wait, even if you try to go back and...
Yeah. So if you kill a boss, you got to wait a week for him to drop.
Holy shit.
For you to do anything, get anything out of him again.
So even if you tried to kill him again, he just wouldn't drop anything for you for a week.
And keeping in mind that, speaking from experience, raids in World of Warcraft are not fast. They, if you're not like over gearing it, if you're actually like kind of like in a halfway, like a progression, you're kind of like gearing up for the next stage. It can take you, 3, 4, 5 hours per raid to get a full clear through it. And pretty much all of that is spent doing exactly the same thing. Not standing in indicators, performing the rotation on your class, and just like in the sea of repetition.
Right. So this amount of like under the hood stuff that's out of the player's control, and the amount of stuff like that was what my next sort of topic was going to segue into. The idea that you have all of this sort of junk that's stopping you from being able to get the gear that you want or get any gear that is in any way valuable to you with any degree of certainty because it's all RNG based. You move from that to, well, maybe the sort of returning factor of the raid is that it's fun to do, but it seems pretty generic. Everything that I've looked at, it seems exactly like what you just described, where you're just repeating the same thing. So
So
whence cometh the replay value? Whence cometh the idea that, oh, these people are the players are going to enjoy themselves at that point when and nothing, they don't get anything useful, or they don't have a good chance of getting anything useful from the experience, and it's not a fun experience in and of itself. It's not like the experience is the reward. So what is the point then? Is what I guess I'm asking. Like, what do you
I
think
don't
these
think
people?
anybody, I don't think anybody who is sentient and doesn't lick windows for a living will tell you that World of Warcraft has good gameplay, because it doesn't. But a lot of these people play because their friends play. It's a communal thing. So if you've got a group of friends and you like MMOs, or at least you're willing to put up with them in my case, there really isn't a lot of other options, because to be quite honest, as bad as World of Warcraft is, pretty much every other MMO out there is much worse. The only other MMO that really has like promising, even like comparatively innovative material within it would be Guild Wars 1. But Guild Wars 1's netcode and controls and stuff like that are a very, very far cry from World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft has a few really, really strong points to it, one of them being the controls. It's the most responsive, it has the best like player feedback, if you will. Like, it just is the smoothest and easiest to play in terms of the responsiveness. The netcode took a few hits because of their server merging and shutting down data centers and stuff like that. Especially for us in Canada, we went from about like an 80 ms to like a 500 ms, nonstop spikes. A very, very unstable connection. Even then, it's still better than, like, for example, Terra, Guild Wars 2, Final Fantasy 14. All those MMOs are just rife with netcode issues and control issues that World of Warcraft doesn't have. So that in itself means that at least when it comes to you engaging the game's content, whatever little content it may have, that experience is going to be smoother and more, like, just more pleasing, just more expected, if you will. Like, it just feels more natural to play. It's really something you only really notice when you spring back into something like Final Fantasy 14 and you start trying to do stuff like jumping on and off your mountain, running around and trying to farm stuff. There's just this distinct sluggishness in the vast majority of these other games.
Almost like you're playing what, like Dark Souls in an MMO form, where every
Yeah.
action you have has some sort of built-in input delay. It feels like, or something
Yeah,
like that.
it's just a lot of games just don't do controls correctly, and that's something Blizzard has historically gotten right. But the vast majority of people play World of Warcraft as simply a glorified chat room. That's why you have the starter edition, is just to facilitate the chat room functionality to begin with, because you can't really do too much else with it. But it is effectively just a chat room. I only played World of Warcraft because of the people I knew who played World of Warcraft. I did all the so-called hardcore raiding. I did, Molten Core all the way up to bits and pieces of Nax 40. I did pretty much all of Burning Crusade. I did, Wrath of the Lich King. I did Warlords of Draenor. I did, Dragon Soul, Firelands, etc. All the legendary chains and stuff like that. And all throughout of it, all the content is basically the same. And the game, I mean, it's really a long subject. To actually really get into it is enormous. That's why I have this, this massive video project that talks about this stuff off and on, because there's so much to really get into. As for why people really get into that, I've often thought about that. I've often thought, why do people play this? Now, the social aspect is definitely really the biggest thing, because I've played with a whole bunch of different people who are really, really serious about PvP, people who are really, really serious about raid progression and min-maxing every little number they can get their hands on, people who really just don't give a shit. And out of all the dozens to hundreds of different people I've played with, pretty much all of them get really pissed off at the game. Like, it's usually the people that keep them coming on. Like, they play because, their friend plays, their spouse plays, these other group of friends play. When their friends stop playing, it didn't matter how much they actually superficially enjoyed the game previous to that, they stopped playing. or they move on to find other friends, and that's sort of the nature of the beast.
So it's kind of like, I mean, it sounds like a lot of multiplayer games in that case then. Because I don't know if this started with
Mm-hmm.
World of Warcraft and spiraled out from there, but
Oh
for
no.
example, League of Legends is a game that I got into because friends of mine started playing it or had started playing it a long time ago, and then they got me into it. And playing without them felt like a waste of my time in like no uncertain terms. So of course I was thinking like, well, why would I do this? I'm only going to play with my friends. I'm only going to play with them when they're on. And then when they stopped playing, then I also lost interest almost immediately. So it seems like if that's the case, what are like the prospective player figures at this point for World of Warcraft then? Because it must be going downhill if they're merging servers and doing
Oh
all
yeah.
this other stuff.
World of Warcraft has been in the shitter for a long time, but they employ strategies to ensure that they keep the money coming. For example, all those bots, they make the money. All the Chinese gold farmers, they make the money. So why would they? This is why you see so many spammers and so many bots in all these games, because really it's as simple as just having one GM look at a list of players, because the bots don't even attempt to hide themselves. Like look at Final Fantasy 14. You go to Northern Thanalan, you will see bots just teleporting from group to group, just farming everything. They've been there since 2.0 came out. Groups of black mages and white mages just teleport underneath the world space. You see them sliding across the world from NPC to NPC, going through the story for, I guess they sell the accounts or something, and or farm like high level materials or whatever. And if I see this just hopping on, that any company with any shred of money or any shred of staff who actually gives a shit is going to be like, hey, we just have a GM sits here with access to account information. It says, oh, these guys are very, very obviously botting or doing something or running a trainer or something. Let's ban them because they're toxic to the game's economy. No, they don't do that because each of those accounts is generating you money. Why would you do that? And then furthermore, Square Enix publishes numbers that says, hey, we have this many accounts on our game, but that's not like actually active subscriptions that they're talking about. It's basically a worthless number. And Blizzard, their game is just filled with bots. I mean, just look at any given one of those screenshots. He had like groups of bots forming URLs out of their bodies floating in the air. It was actually really quite entertaining. Obviously, the bots mining, mineral nodes and herbalism nodes and stuff like that, since those are also all now personalized, it's even more silly because that means you can't actually deny them the ability to farm stuff by farming it yourself. They're always going to be farming it. They're always going to be selling that stuff. I saw lots of bots running Zul'Farrak when I was checking out that zone, and running a few instances during my recordings. There's lots of bots. I have nice recordings of bots running. What was it? It's when one of Mounts drop and Cataclysm in Deep Home. I forget the name of it. It was like, I don't know, but no, it's World of Warcraft is, when you talk about subscription numbers and people unsubbing and resubbing, you get into the whole marketing thing and how Blizzard is constantly trying to pander to people with the nostalgia card and being like, hey, look, we remember what games were like. We're calling back to Warcraft. Like, just look at their latest expansion, Battle for Azeroth. They've got that title screen that's like Warcraft 2 Tides of Darkness, I think it was. And they're like, hey, look, it's Warcraft. It's orcs and humans again. And meanwhile, we've got this backdrop of like the Void Elves and all this other just ridiculous, asinine shit. And
That was
I
going
don't
to
know.
be something that I brought up, is that they banned all third-party servers and then created legacy servers, right? Like that's something that they have now?
Mm,
Or is that something they're
I haven't-
planning? I've heard about legacy
they're
servers
planning at the very
somewhere.
least. I haven't checked to see if it's up yet, because I'm sure if it was up, I'd be getting a lot from people who would be like, hey, look, Blizzard did this and that to the classic server. It's not actually classic anymore, because you can guarantee it's not going to be a straight classic port. If they do a straight classic port and don't touch anything from some patch in classic, I will be absolutely astonished, because Blizzard has this obsession with like, we can't just fix something. We got to rework the whole thing. We got to redo everything. Riot is a lot like that too, you've probably noticed. It's like a hero has something that's blatantly broken with it. They just start like sticking their dick into anything that has a hole.
Yeah, well, when they rework old heroes in League, they tend to Well, first of all, like that's part of the reason why power creep even exists, right? Because
Yeah.
they look at a hero that's not doing very well, and they say, "Well, this champion has it has the problem of not having any crowd control. That's why it's not doing very well." And they don't look at it as a problem with every other champion that has crowd control, crowding this champion out, because that's like a bad way to design a game. But they instead look at it as the problem is there's not enough crowd control, and they
You
add
ever
more.
want to get pissed off? Just go on to Roll20 or Surrender at 20 rather, and read any posts that are quoting Riot developers. You will get pissed in a hurry. Like, I don't know how the hell have these people even have jobs.
Well, there was a pretty good one that I saw somewhere that was them talking about one of the recent skins that they came out, and I guess that segues pretty well into what we were the World of Warcraft economy, because they have a long history, Blizzard does, with reskinning existing content and then selling it. So,
Well, I mean, you've got the white from Alpha World of Warcraft. They have used that model and that rig so much in that game, and they're still using it to this day. It has never once looked good. But nobody who plays that game has any standards anyways, so why would we improve something and spend money on development if we don't have to? Just also as a segue, I'm gonna probably have to go AFK in a foreseeable future, so...
all right. How long do you think you'll be gone for?
I have no idea. Well, I'll be gone for probably about like 10-15 minutes. I don't know when I'm gonna be going now.
Okay. Well,
Everything's kind of a mess around here, so...
yeah. Sounds like a plan. I'm sure I can find some way to fill time anyways. Well,
but yeah, the reskinning thing is insane. I mean, like, Riot sells hue shifts.
yeah, it's literally their chroma skins that they have
And
are
this
pretty.
is like right after they were crying about how they didn't have ways to like reward players for their mastery skills and stuff. And it's like, oh wait, we can have color shifts. Nope, let's make them pay a lot of money for that.
Yeah, it's actually an insane amount of cash. It's like
And-
I think it's $5 to unlock those chromas, so
Yeah.
it's pretty. That's pretty big in the long term.
And then Riot saw that people were getting too many skins off of loot boxes for just playing the game. So much like Blizzard did in their Heroes 2.0 update, they had to flood the loot boxes with a bunch of asinine shit that cost them no money to develop, like the emotes and crap and freaking icons. I actually got a survey from Riot a couple of days ago that was like, do you think these icons are priced reasonably? And I'm like,
No,
no.
I don't even know. Like, icons are weird because anything that this is like Heroes of the Storm has this problem a lot where you just get to the point where you have content that doesn't really feel like actual. It's not real content. It's just
it's not even like relevant to the game. Like your
Yeah.
icon, I don't think you even see your icon in League, other than maybe the score screen,
no, it's the loading. Yeah, it's the loading screen and
loading screen and score screen. Like it's like, why are you paying for this? Like I have a really hard time justifying paying for skins, anyways, because as a technical artist, I don't see any justification to paying for skins. Because for one, the vast majority of them are just kit batches. They take you like half a day to make. For two, particle effects are easy as fuck to make. Riot always complains, particle effects are so hard. Oh, and then all their particle effects are just slight recolors anyways.
well, they wonder.
And-
Yeah, I think a big issue with any game that has particle effects in general. Well, any 3D game is always readability, right? That's the big problem.
Oh, and their particles are bad for readability.
Yeah.
Heroes is more so. Like Riot has, I think, cleaned up a lot of the reads in their game, but there's still just at least they recognize there's a problem with it. They've talked about it, but they haven't really tried to address it yet. Meanwhile, Blizzard is like, what is reads anyways? We don't really need that in our game, so we're just not gonna have it. So Heroes of the Storm is like invisible damage everywhere and flashing shit, and just like when there's a team fight, it's just this massive, fractal distortion and all this other garbage.
So I'm looking. Speaking of readability, I'm in Mulgore right now,
Oh boy.
and I'm looking at a tree, and that's always a fun experience in this game. But
It's always a wonder if you're gonna find that THQ tree again.
I
You know
think
the
I
one.
found something better. I'll send you a screen cap. You can tell me if this even looks like a tree.
World of Warcraft is home to some really fantastic assets, and pretty much like it's rare to find something in that game that is not fucked up. The sheer vastness of shit that's fucked is really over. Ah, yes, you found the sliding fire texture. So in Cataclysm, Blizzard was like, we're updating the old world, and I put, a million fucking quotation marks around updating. And we have fire in places because the elements are setting stuff on fire. So we gotta have fire. So Blizzard was like, Blizzard was like, hey, we're gonna put fire on these trees. And then we're like, oh shit, we don't know how to do that. Let's create some stretched box models and apply a sliding texture to it.
Yeah, but they're these stretched box models are part of the tree trunk somehow. Like,
yeah,
what is that?
It's like cones and stuff, where they outstretch the tree model or whatever and overlaid it on top of it.
They just have these 2D boxes that are. They have. I just don't understand that one.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Like, and people like when this first came out, someone actually tried to tell me this looked good.
No.
That I'm not joking. Like, someone actually tried to defend this. I was, on one hand, I hadn't really experienced the full breadth of the liberal apologist at that stage, so I really wasn't like entirely sure what I was getting my anus into. That people were actually like legit thinking this way. So I was really quite astonished. Like, how could anybody think they look good? Because for one, it doesn't do its job correctly. The vast majority of trees that have these fire textures on them do not have a burning ember tree trunk. It's just, a black tree with this sliding texture overlaid on a box, kind of stretched to sort of fit it. And yeah, there's a couple exceptions, but not many. And like, this is more work to go through to do this than it would be just to make a particle effect. And then use, your tree texture that has like embers and stuff painted into it.
I don't want to get too off topic talking about trees and shit, but one of the other things that I can't help but notice is that the text, like the textures have some crazy alpha mapping going on where they have like it's just black around the leaves.
Yep.
And I don't get how that's possible.
Blizzard is a very, very heavy proponent of Google image search, as you have seen within award-winning titles such as StarCraft 2, where they pull stuff off of Google image search and kind of tape it together inside, MS Paint or something, and then it's like a bunch of different resolutions, and you've got black aliasing lines everywhere.
Yeah, around the edges,
alpha masking
especially.
In Blizzard is they go way back.
I just don't understand how it's possible to have that every single time. Like, you also have that with those weird like overhang things that they try to do in their forests a lot.
Yeah.
And the stuff at the top of their environments it's always like that. It's always crazy.
You remember Fellwood.
Yeah.
And the thorns and that you probably saw in Mongol.
Yeah, exactly. Mongol indeed.
So, yeah, it's like, I don't think they don't possess the ability to do it correctly, because with that much money, it's like impossible to say that. Like, if you wanted to do it correctly, just buy someone who knows how to do it. It's that the people who play the game and keep giving them money don't care. Like, they just don't care. They don't care what you do to them. It's like people who play League of Legends. And, you're talking about psychology and why do people do this stuff. And I think League of Legends is an even better example of this kind of absurdity than World of Warcraft, because in World of Warcraft, there's a bunch of things you can do if you don't want to get into, one grind. You can do another grind. Like, for example, pet battles is something I did for a long time when I didn't give a shit about raiding anymore. And the pet battle system in World of Warcraft is like some intern's pet project, and it isn't too bad superficially to spend some time on, especially when you weren't actually paying any money for the game, because you could just play with gold. But League of Legends is even more absurd, because a lot of people I talked to who are really into like the ladder grind, they were like diamond, platinum, etc., and they were all like, I want to rank up. And I would ask, okay, so I'm a person who liked to play team 5v5 ranked team.
Right.
Obviously that doesn't exist anymore. And I asked, do any of these people ever want to actually play a team? And they'd be like, no. And I'd be like, but isn't that ultimately where getting good at this game is supposed to take you? because if you want it to be like professionally successful, you're gonna need a team, and no one ever had an answer for that. And furthermore, the people who rank up get so very, very, very angry. They're always raging about people in their games, or the balance for the game or whatever. Like when I played a League of Legends, obviously it's not a balanced game. Anyone who thinks that way is kidding themselves. And people get very, very angry about it, and then they would say, "Oh, it's not that bad balance," and they come up like a bunch of excuses after the fact. But it was clear that their actual experience of the game was super toxic, and they weren't enjoying it. But they had to like fabricate excuses to play it for some reason. And I have to go now, but I'll continue this when I come back. And I just wanted to say that I always found it fascinating. I'm going to tell you a little story I ran into with Blizzard Dota Heroes of the Storm with some of these people when I get back. And
all right, I'll try and remember that so I can remind you.
I'll fork off of that. So I'll be about 5-10 minutes.
All right, sounds like a plan. While good old Mesk is gone, I can tell you guys a little bit about World of Warcraft's environmental design, and I'll interact with the chat a little bit because I see Bethel's been sending messages. Don't understand how they can add Void Elves and Nightborn when they already have Night Elves. That is an interesting quagmire that they find themselves in, isn't it? Because at this point, they've proven, I guess, that they have no idea how to make a visually distinct race. It's not like the races really matter anyways, because the races don't offer you significant deviations in playstyle. In fact, I think only the starting area is different, because... And it's not always different either. I think Orcs and Trolls share one, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe they added a Troll-specific one. But they do have a situation where in World of Warcraft you have the issue of races not actually having distinct differences beyond appearances. So if there's no difference in appearance, and there's no new starting area, which I believe there isn't for the Nightborn and Void Elf and whatever the fuck else, but maybe there is. Even beyond the starting area, though, that only takes you between like levels 1 through 15, I think, usually, or 1 through 20. Beyond the starting area, which may be different, and I'm only giving them the benefit of the doubt because I haven't personally bothered to go and check those races out. You get to the point then where why do you even bother with this race if there's no gameplay difference, which there never is? It's just that's determined by your class, which is not usually racially locked, and there's not only is there no gameplay difference, but there's also no aesthetic difference now between Night Elves and fucking Void Elves. They look very similar. They actually have a different texture on their skin or something like that, maybe even a different model. But they're very similar visually, despite having those differences and not just being a fucking retexture, like most of the other races are. Or some of the other races are, I should say. Oh, ice cold milk. I got some milk from that Tauren. That makes sense. Anyways, that is a really good example of a failure to incentivize people to even bother playing the game for its new races at that point, What do I give a shit if my character looks different and that's the only difference? At that point, I might as well just go to my old character that I have, which I didn't compel me enough to continue playing the game anyways if I'm a returning player checking out the new content, and that's the only reason why I'm here, right? So, if that's the only reason why I'm here, then what does it matter that there's these new races that don't actually have any gameplay change? I might as well just go open up my old character and say, let me change my armor. That'll do the trick. So, it seems really foolish that they went with that strategy, I guess is what I'm saying. Now, not really sure what's up with the Void Elves. Haven't really looked into them for more than a second, basically, because they say have Void in their name, and why the fuck would I give a shit? Now, I don't think Blizzard has ever made a good tree. Yeah, we talked about trees. StarCraft 2, almost every turn explosion sound effect is actually the same. Well, in StarCraft 1, that was like that too, but I'm more inclined to believe that was due to like limitations on the engine. It probably wasn't, I guess. Like, it's probably not consistent to say that. But, I mean, modders can have distinct attack sounds for everything anyways, especially stuff that they add in that's new should probably use distinct sound effects. That's something that I specifically try to do. If I add something new, it's generally got to have something that's obviously distinct about it. But, yeah, in StarCraft 2, there's definitely no excuse. There's no technology excuse at that point. And it's really important for readability that something about it is immediately different to both your eyes and your ears. So it has to be visually distinct. It has to be sonically, audibly distinct. I think that has to happen. Well, siege tanks are different from wraiths and vultures, but a lot of the sound effects for units exploding, for example, are the same. I can't remember. It might be siege tank and Goliath. That's the same. Or no, it's the Goliath and something else that's the same. I'm pretty sure. Anyways, the point is, there's like explo4.wav and explo5.wav are shared by a couple of different things. There's also certain explosion graphics that are shared. That, for example, the graphic of the death for the units that I just mentioned, actually all the factory units, I believe, use the same graphic when they explode. So that's poor design in my opinion. You really should have something that instantly tells you what unit just died. I don't think it's particularly hand-holdy either, but it's also not like the biggest issue. Whereas in StarCraft 2, because the game is 3D, it's definitely a bigger issue. It's definitely a lot more difficult to deal with. What is this? Dire Beast. Summons a powerful wild beast. Wow, that sounds so cool. He only attacks for 8 seconds, though. Anyways, this is what I was getting at. There's a fucking gazelle and a prairie wolf alpha, and they're right next to each other. There's critters everywhere. There's like rabbits and gazelles, and Blizzard thought, hey, by putting these in the game, you know what we're doing? We're making a cool, awesome, like an environment that has all of these living creatures in them. It's just so dumb, because these living creatures should be contributing to a realistic ecosystem, if that's what they're going to do. So if you have critters running around right next to wolves, it's probably not a very realistic ecosystem. I'll put it to you that way. So it just seems like an obvious oversight, where I'm walking around here, and I don't know how I can possibly be immersed by an Elder Planestrider that's just sitting here, and is obviously prey for wolves and prowlers that are for some reason sharing an ecosystem and not aggressing on one another at all. I don't know, man. Just seems a little weird. That's all. Vegetarian wolves, yeah. There you go. Yes, Terran buildings are definitely ones that are shared. I think in both games. Malachite. Fly that kite. Hoopthrower says that he loves the StarCraft 1 Dragoon sound when it dies. It's like a toy. It is kind of peculiar, isn't it? It certainly doesn't sound like the cry of a Protoss that is being killed. Unlike the Zealot. You know what I mean? The Zealot obviously sounds different. Kill this mouse. Get rid of it. I'm looking for one more creature. I have to grind these creatures because obviously when you shoot these prairie alphas, all of their teeth get destroyed. Not a single one survives, so you've got to kill more than just one to get one tooth. Well, it's fine if wolves come out and interact with the environment by killing gazelles and fighting with other monsters and stuff. Or creatures in general, like Planestriders. They should be chasing these things around. There should be shit that's going down in the game. That's, you know, world events. Ambient events of a world. Like, I don't know why this is such a like, why does the wolf have a wood chopper, too? Like, they really need to update the item table. Unless their idea is not to make an they're not trying to design something that's immersive, but then it seems like that is what they're trying to design. So I don't know. I don't get it. Don't understand. Bristleback interloper, by the way. We'll go complete that quest. Oops, we accidentally aggroed a Planestrider because I was just right-clicking. Thinking I was playing Warcraft 3 or something where I had to right-click to order my units. Most lions don't have any paws, yeah. I remember wolf paws in the undead starting area or something back in Classic. Had a similar issue where you're trying to get a wolf paw. It's pretty crazy. That's still around. Another thing that I think the environmental design of World of Warcraft really suffers from is that as you get into the harder levels, the higher level areas, I should say, all wolves become alphas. That's not how it would work. There would just be some alphas mixed in with a large majority of regular wolves. And then there would be some pups or whelps or something that would be way worse. You think back to, like, creep camps in Warcraft 3 melee maps. Those actually went a long way to giving a cool feel to the Warcraft 3 melee maps, I think, because they had like some sort of ecosystem, and you could tell that there was these. There were a number of these creatures that had some sort of hierarchy, where it would be like a dire wolf flanked by 2 regular wolves or 1 regular wolf. And it's like, oh, there's like a bigger wolf and a smaller wolf. It's not just all the same uniform creature, you know? So, I don't know, man. I'm cleansing another well, apparently. That's great. I don't have any friends. You should know this by now, World of Warcraft. So, what is these? Oh. Kyle's gone missing. Listen, don't tell me about my target. Alright, let's go cleanse a well. Hi. Well, I mean, that's something that's so easily taken care of. If you just make it like a paw set, and then every animal has a paw set of paws, and then you have to get 5 sets of paws. Well, then you've got to kill 5 animals. Certainly doesn't make any sense that some of them wouldn't have any. You know what I mean? One stat block for all bandits. Yeah. I don't know, man. I feel like ambient events go a huge way into making your environment seem alive. Like, at this point, it's just so obvious that these units don't interact with each other. They just patrol back and forth in very small areas. They, like, move somewhere, stop, turn around, move somewhere again, stop, turn around. And they have a leash radius. If they move too far, they go back. And that's it. That's their entire AI. That's everything about the game. That's everything about this environment, is all of these monsters, all of these creatures, are not interacting with their ecosystem. They're not animals. They're not even sentient fucking creatures. So it doesn't make any sense. Ghost towel, by the way. Demon-scarred cloak. The ragged hide of Ghost Howl still bears a terrible wound, gained from the wolves' battles against the Burning Legion. And I'll get Scorn's rifle. That's so cool. So edge. Oh shit, I passed right by... What? This Prowler just came out of nowhere. Maybe he prowls his way to victory. What a name, by the way. Hey, Rawflesh, welcome to the chat. It's nice to see you again, too. StarCraft's anniversary is coming. I think it's the 30th or 31st or something. I don't remember. Why am I purifying so many ghosts... Or, not ghosts. Wells in general. We talked about designing enemies to actually work together as a group similar to the player party. Yeah, well, that would be ideal. You can see the level scaling in effect here too, because these enemies were like level 9 earlier. Well, I probably wasn't on stream when I was playing that, but like now I'm level 12, so these are level 13 and 12. Next week will be your birthday. Happy early birthday. It's your birthday and it's StarCraft's birthday. That's crazy. Another thing that you can probably tell is that when I'm attacking, I press 1 to use my Cobra shot. Like, I'll press 1 now. You see how now it's fine? But then there's like a delay. See, I pressed 1, and then it took like at least a second before the projectile fired. I don't know what's up with that. I'll kill the gazelle so it looks like the wolf did it. It'll be so immersive for the next player that walks through here. Too bad all of this is phased anyways. Heart of the Swarm was released on your birthday? That sounds like an awful birthday present. I'm sorry. I think designing things that just work in a way that makes sense is really, it just goes a long way. I don't understand the idea that, do I want Dusk Watcher's leg guards or Hawkeye rifle? I don't know. Let me go and turn in this quest so I can get Scorn's rifle. I think it does more damage. We have to get that. There's no other... Oops. There's nothing else, so... Let me find it. Where is it? Long stalker? No. Pellet rifle? No. Scorn's rifle. It does the same thing, except this one gives you +1 agility. +1 more agility. Oh, I guess I'll get these leg guards then. Seven armor, 1 agility, 11 armor. Yeah, okay, that's better. I hope you won't get an infested cake too. I don't know, that might be cool. Just don't eat it. Just hang it on your wall or something. It'll be a cool ornament. I don't know what gear even does in this game, honestly. Besides a whole lot of nothing. There used to be all these like weird gear stats that they had. It doesn't seem like they have those anymore. It's random corpses. Probably from me earlier. I really wish I had a mount or something. This would be made a lot faster. I have to go into the... Okay. I have to go meet Bane, son of Cairn. I merely adopted the Tauren. He was born in it, molded by it. Didn't see the real orc race, real horde race, until he was already a man. He made a cinematic map from the movie The Big Lebowski. I heard that Big Lebowski is actually like a really good movie. I've never watched it though. I guess I'll have to start watching it at some point. Elder Rise. Well, I don't know what's going on. Yeah, these prowlers are like cloaked or something. That's really weird. Must be part of their amazing creature design. It makes them so cool. Get these gazelles out of here. Okay. Well, eventually we're gonna get somewhere here, man. Yeah, I know. Don't remind me about Warcraft 3 Bane. It was supposed to be his son, but he had a fully grown beard. That just proves to you that Rexar's campaign was just a fucking pet project or something by one guy. Sort of like Heart of the Swarm. Am I going the right way? Yeah, I have to go up. How do I get up? There's no way up. This is bogus. Like that terrain, by the way? Look at that. Hold on, I gotta kill this clown.
You got him in your mouth?
Yeah, the terrain.
That's what you guys doing.
I'm just grinding, man. That's what this
what
podcast is all about. I was just mentioning how I went on a long tirade about World of Warcraft's environmental design, where they have wolves next to gazelles, and how everything is just a unit that's like patrolling back and forth for 5 feet, then spinning around and doing the same thing, and they have a leash range, and they just behave like critters in Warcraft 3. And I drew a parallel between the number of, like, the kinds of units that you'll see, right? Because you'll have in a certain area, after a certain point, all the wolves turn into alpha wolves, but that's not how it is in real life. You have wolves that are bigger, wolves that are smaller, you've got some whelps, you've got some not so...
That doesn't
whelps.
improve when you reach like level 110 and you're doing like endgame zones. It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I don't know. It boggles my mind that it's not a hard concept to have. They even did it in Warcraft 3 melee maps, you know? They did like, here's a creep camp where there's like a dire wolf and a wolf whelp right next to him. And it's like such a no-brainer. If you're going to have these things interact with the world, maybe they should be killing the gazelles that are patrolling right next to them.
There are some critters that will get attacked by wolves and stuff in that game, but it's obviously super specific stuff. And what usually ends up happening is if you're trying to actually kill wolves, you got like a quest or you want to get some out of them. They kill the critter, then immediately evade lock, and they have to like wait for them to reset to even hit them.
That's great.
It's fantastic.
It's my kind of.
No, what the hell was that? Oh yeah, so I was
I'm
talking
talking about
about
League.
League and Blizzard, Dota, and people in the freaking ladder grind and shit. So
Yeah, I
a
mean,
little while
I
ago,
was a high level player. I got all the way up to Diamond 2, and I was in Season 6, and then I just lost interest.
I had high diamond MMR in Blizzard Dota. I had a team filled with people who are basically like silvers, and I still managed to hold platinum in that. And a lot of those people just quit for whatever reason. They just stopped playing. Hello, Kitty. And yeah, so I didn't play for a long time, but I was still like I still played every now and then. I would play with, like some drunk bronies and stuff who were like high diamond masters, and just basically destroying. I think like for one of the seasons, I was actually just entirely undefeated and unranked. So you think maybe you want to get like a group of people together and like see how far you can actually go, because unranked draft and quick match is just all rubbish. And so I didn't have a group, obviously, at that stage, but I knew a group of people who were getting into it, and a couple of people who were playing it that were like platinum diamond level. And a couple of these people are pretty serious about Hero League and solo queue basically. And so we played a bunch of games. We played a bunch of ranked games, actually, a bunch of ranked fives with some people who are just starting out, but were like like gold, platinum level in League, because they were like, oh, we'll switch to this game because it's less retarded. I guess that was their excuse, anyways. So we spent like an entire night playing this shit, and most of the games we won, we did pretty well. So next day we're like, hey, are we gonna get like a team together? Maybe set up something a little more organized, or when are we gonna play? And then this guy's like, one of the other top players is like, I don't want to play with you guys. I don't want to play with anyone from this Discord server. And he's like, I only like what had happened at the night that eventually killed the runs is he basically left the group to play solo queue. Even though we were winning like 9 out of 10 games, we were destroying. This guy's like, oh, I'm gonna go play solo queue. Like that's. Like, regardless of what game you're in or what you're doing, that's just a dick move altogether. That's a real dick move. It's just to drop everybody and just be like, I'm gonna go play solo queue. So
I'm struggling to understand the motivation behind a player that prefers to play. I guess it just comes down to personal preference. If you'd rather play by yourself with strangers, but
especially when you're always complaining about the strangers on top of it. Like some people have a lot of patience. Like Mildog, you probably know who he is.
Yeah.
He played a lot of solo queue League, and he would stream it to me, and I watched him, and it was like silver level, and it was always a shit show. And he'd try to like get people together, and I'd ask him, how the hell do you put up with all these retards? Not just the retards, not just the people who are really bad and refuse to really do or whatever or cooperate, but the people who are just like insanely toxic on top of it. And he never really gave me an answer that I found convincing. He was like, he tries to find some kind of value in bringing the team together, and that's understandable. But the thing is, in the solo queue, every single game is going to be a new group of people, and most of the time they're not going to want to work together. Especially at lower elo, you're never going to find a group of people who are really going to synergize. Like 9 times out of 10, most of these people are going to end up hating each other for some reason or another, because in a team environment, if you fuck up and you don't like fessing up for your own fuck ups, you have such an easy escape. Just blame somebody else. That's the number one reason why all these games are incredibly toxic. It's a cooperative game, but the cooperative nature means that you can blame somebody else for your mistakes. It gives you an easy escape.
Well, I think a big part of League being the player base of League seeming toxic, I think a huge part of that is actually the design of the game, because Counter-Strike is a good example of a game where, at least in my experience, you do get the occasional person who's like closed-minded and are just not self-aware enough to realize like where they screwed up, or too prideful to admit that they screwed up in the first place, even if they do realize it. But it's far more rare to get something like that in CSGO for like all of your team members, or a significant portion of them. So
I rarely encountered it in Halo PC.
Yeah, so I think that something about shooters where, especially the game design of the shooter is like, what? Holy shit, my pet was flying through the air. Anytime you have like, for example, in CSGO, it's like, yeah, there's economy in the game that if you win enough rounds, you'll get like better equipment than I do. But I can still kill you with a pistol if I'm good enough. Yep. So like at every point in the game, I can choose I can somehow interact and express my skill in a way that if I'm good enough, I don't actually need anybody on my team. I can 1v5 literally and win the game if I'm really that good, or if I play my cards right. It doesn't even have to be something that's so out of the question. So at every point in the game, I feel like I have some ability, with some window of opportunity. And instead of just licking, yeah, exactly. So instead of just licking that window, I'm actually using it, and that feels a lot better than being forced to do nothing because certain champion X got kill Y at time Z, and now they're way more powerful than they would have been otherwise. And it's something that had nothing to do with me. Maybe I'm the top laner, and my bottom lane gets double killed by the enemy Lee Sin jungle, and now he's gonna just snowball everything in the game because he's way.
I'm gonna expand
harder.
on this in 1 second. I have to go AFK again very momentarily. I'll be back in like 10 seconds.
Okay. So, Chad, what I was talking about there is like a really classic example of, I think MOBA design in general has this part where it feels like it's really hard for you to impact the game if your teammates are taken advantage of by the enemy team to a certain point. Like, if the enemy bottom laner gets too many kills, then the enemy... It doesn't matter that you're doing well in top lane if their bottom laner gets ahead enough, or their jungler, or their mid laner, or something that happens that you had no control of and couldn't have possibly impacted in any way. It doesn't feel fair by comparison, is basically the end result.
Running around. Yeah, so, as a direct example of that, I played a league a while back, some months ago. Obviously, Nidalee middle hasn't been a thing forever.
Yeah.
But I was just playing, it was like low level, so I'll try Nidalee middle because they had a LeBlanc. And I hate LeBlanc pretty much end to end. And I was just like, well, whatever. I don't play anything as good against her anyway, so I'll just play Nidalee mid. I destroyed her. I was like 15-0. But their top laner was Darius. And he destroyed our top laner real bad. Like, it was pretty much equivalent. Like, he was also like 14-15-0 or 15-1 or something. So, I've destroyed and he is destroyed, but there's actually nothing I can do against him at all. He's built pure damage, and nothing I do hurts him at all. And he just touches me and I'm dead and I can't escape from him. So, even though I did super well, something else that happened else in the game, just because of the way it's designed, means that I literally can do nothing. Like, I can't just prey on his team and try to take control of the map, because he's just going to shove in our base, and you have to respond to that, or he's just going to take the Nexus. And there's, like, nothing anyone else on my team can even do, because they're, like, so far behind. And it's ridiculous. But also, one of the things that really leads to a lot of frustration just beyond that is the game length. So the average match in CS is just, like, a couple minutes, usually. The average match in Halo PC was a little longer, but still, can
I don't know what CS you're playing. Usually they take about 60 minutes.
Well, I mean, each round.
Oh, yeah. Round. Yeah.
You buy your items, you go fight for the objective. That only takes a couple minutes. And then you're right back at, shopping and dealing with stuff again. So let's say you fuck up and you die.
Yeah.
And then you lose the round. Well, that's okay, because you've still got the whole actual match to go. So, there's a lot of different chances for you to have an impact. And like you were saying, you can have an impact with anything you've got. Like in Halo, most people use the pistol. And, despite the absolutely insane latency that game had, most people just use the pistol because it was reliable. You started with it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And, with a pistol, you could do a lot, even though in the Halo PC version, they fucked up the balance real bad with stuff like the FRG and the flamethrower. Still, generally, you could outplay those people if you knew what you were doing, and depending on the map. So, but still, the match length was pretty short. So, you have one super toxic experience, then, it's not the end of the game, because it's not like they're getting some kind of lead. But with League of Legends, it's super snowbally. Same with Blizzard Dota. You fuck up once in Blizzard Dota, it can easily chain off into them having like a 3 or 4 level lead, and then you actually cannot fight them anymore. It's the equivalent of like a 10 to 20,000 gold lead in terms of stats. Like, you just can't do anything. And depending on the map, because they've added so many 2-lane snowball heavy maps now, you can't even like split push or try to soak or really get anything. If they actually pay attention and control the lanes, it's just, you screw up once, you have no way of coming back at all. Like, many of the larger maps in that game I've seen end in like under 7 minutes. and it's like ridiculous. And it's like, how the hell does this even happen? Because you don't even have you don't have items or anything like what League has in this game. How does this snowball happen? It's because the experience is global in that game, so it's very snowball heavy. League is very much the same. And the thing about League is insanely stressful because it has so much CC in it that basically you push this button, this guy can't do shit. He's fucked. It doesn't matter how good he is. If he's 1 pixel out of place and he gets hit by a stun, that's the end of the game. And that could be a 40, 50-minute game that he's invested, so much time into, so many plays into, really, really devoted into, and just one slight miscalculation, that's it. I was in a game that was about 60 minutes long, or a little over 60 minutes long, and it was super, super close. And we were losing pretty badly. The enemy Vayne, for some reason, went close to the Baron pit, like the ramp from the north right, leaning towards Baron, just very, very slightly. Our tank touched Vayne because our tank was over there warding, instantly killed Vayne. That's it. That's the end of the game. Just right there. Just one slight miscalculation. Didn't quite have vision, and then a tank touched her, dead. And then, like at that stage, no matter what the enemy team does, they can't win. It's over. It's 5v4. With everybody having like full builds and shit, they've lost their primary damage dealer. There's really just nothing they can do. We just steamroll their base and win. And that's the end of like a 60-minute game. One very slight miscalculation. No way did that guy not get angry about that. Like, no way did his team not get angry about that. So you go through that many experiences, the average player at that skill level, like Diamond, Platinum, has, at least like several hundred games under their belt, generally in the thousands from what I've seen.
Yeah.
You just keep going through these experiences over and over and over and over and over and over again, it's going to erode at even the most patient of people.
I mean, there's definitely some element of that involved. I think it's I just don't understand what gets people to come back. I guess it sort of sinks back into that idea that we were talking about with World of Warcraft. Like, why do people play the grind in that game? And you're saying it's a social aspect there, but obviously in this case it's not a social aspect. It's weird because now these people are avoiding team games to play solo queue where they have these shitty experiences. So I don't really know why I know why I stayed long enough to get Diamond 2 is because I was motivated by being good, and I wanted to be good enough, like really good. I wanted to see how far I could go, and it was partially an experiment just as much as it was an investment. And at the end of the day, I decided, well. I got hard stuck in Diamond 2, and I said, all right, well, I can't get any better right now. I don't feel like investing any more time, so I'm going to quit. And that's how I left it. But I don't know why everybody else continues to play. Why people who are hard stuck in Bronze 5, who have like 5,000 games in Bronze 5, play that much and still don't get out of Bronze 5. I don't know why they continue to play. I don't know what's up with them.
Well, for one, what makes it simple is it's also a super easy game. It's not a very demanding game. It's demanding when you get into the social aspect because if you're trying to manage 5 people, trying to shot call the entire map, at the high level, then things are going to get insane. But usually when it's just like the one person, like all the way up until like I'd say like high platinum, low diamond, the game is super, super easy.
Yeah.
And the entry barrier is very low and the commitment is very low. Like compared to Brood War, the APM requirements alone are tremendously different.
Right.
And I'm not talking about like the 300, 500 APM span of professional Brood War. I mean, to actually be competent at Brood War, you need to have pretty good map awareness, multitasking, control, and be able to use effective APM. Whereas in a Dota clone, you just have a lot of spam, but the actual effective APM you need to succeed is much lower. And that's very alluring for a lot of people because, look to StarCraft 2. When StarCraft 2 came out and people realized it was a heaping pile of shit, so many of them jumped ship to League of Legends and, Dota 2 and stuff like that. Like, especially the high-level players who weren't the top of the top. People who couldn't foreseeably make a lot of money off of tournaments. They were like, well, I'm going to go to where there's other professional play, and I'm not doing very well in StarCraft 2, which is astounding because it's already an incredibly brain-dead game. I'm just going to do something even more brain dead where I might have a chance of succeeding in at least by streaming. And a lot of those people went to League of Legends. A lot of those people went to Dota 2. And I don't know if many of them found success. I didn't really follow a lot of them, but I believe quite a few of them did at least, succeed fairly well in terms of streaming. So it's the entry barrier is definitely much lower. I mean, that's obviously a thing with World of Warcraft too. It's something you'll note. World of Warcraft, in terms of MMOs, not having very intimate familiarity with, unfortunately, like the golden age of MMOs, as many people would call them, like the Dark Age of Camelot. My closest experience is stuff like Lineage 2. Classic World of Warcraft was a significantly more difficult game in terms of the ability to progress as a solo individual than it is today. Today as a solo individual, I could basically get almost anything in the game. You can buy your way with gold or real money through raids. There are many botters and stuff who offer services to just give you gear through raids. Like if you go into the party finder and that, you may even see a bunch of them advertising it in their websites and stuff like that. Before, people just sold it for gold, but I'm pretty sure a lot of those are actually real money advertisements at this stage, because Blizzard doesn't shut those people down. So, but back then, to even level up to level 60 actually took some degree of time, and especially on the PvP servers that I played on, like there was actually a fair degree of difficulty and slowness to it, as opposed to now, where it's like if I want to level a character, and I'm going to do this in my video compilation because somebody's actually bankrolled this, the process of leveling up now is just ridiculous. Like it's so easy. Stabby Man series, I don't know if you've ever watched that. It's like the very first video I ever created, at least edited videos.
No, I haven't.
Really juvenile shit. But even so, with the content, and it's like classic World of Warcraft is doing stuff nobody did at that time. Soloing group quests, soloing elites, doing all this stuff nobody really did unless they were like a warlock or a hunter. And I was doing that as a rogue in like the shittiest gear imaginable. And I did that mostly just to challenge myself, like in the same way you were talking about ranking up in League. It was like, I'm not doing it because it's fast and I want to hit level 60. I'm doing it because this is a challenge. Nobody else wants to do this. Nobody else can do this. So I'm gonna see what I can do. And it made for a very interesting recording. It most certainly did. But now in the game, all that stuff that I did in Stabby Man, it doesn't even exist anymore. So in Shanktarium Season 3, I move on to soloing entire 5-man dungeons, because that's like the only thing at this stage that's even remotely challenging for me now. And the raids are like that as well. They're super easy now. And it's really bizarre. Like you probably have noticed this with like StarCraft 2 and Diablo 3 as well, is the difficulties just get juggled around. They don't actually amount to anything. And back in World of Warcraft, they introduced the heroic difficulty at one point. And the heroic difficulty basically says, hey, this unit has more health. It drops higher level stuff. It has a few extra mechanics, is really the big thing. So some of the bosses would actually become quite a clusterfuck in heroic difficulty. And then they added in mythic difficulty. And mythic difficulty was identical to heroic difficulty. Heroic difficulty still existed, but it was easier than normal difficulty used to be. And then normal difficulty was even more of a brainless stomp than it used to be. Like I was actually really astounded by some of the fights in Warlords of Draenor, how the game had progressed. Do you think, as you go up in the expansions and the game gets older, you probably want to have some easier content to break newer players into? But you do that through the dungeons, not through the raids. The raids were just like
raids are end game content, right?
Yeah, raids are basically when people play MMOs, they almost always do it for the raids. Their ideal concept is either as a pickup. Watching this R-Type 3 run, it's amazing.
Is R-Type 3 is one of those shmups?
Yes, this is glorious. So basically, people either through pickup groups or through a static group of people they know or a guild they play with or whatever, their ideal end game is to be, inside that raid grinding the gear progression or whatever. I don't personally understand really what the draw is with that. In much the same sense, I don't understand what the draw of games like, Diablo 2 are beyond the immersive experience. I played a shit ton of Diablo 2. I did a lot of grinding in Diablo 2. And I did that because, Diablo 2 Classic was a decent game. It was immersive. It had a good setting. There was some enjoyment in playing out of it, which Blizzard, eventually drove into the ground as time went on and never paid attention to at all with Diablo 3. But the process of actually, investing this massive amount of time, I believe when I was regularly raiding, some of this was 3-4 days of 5 or 6 hours a night, a week, just doing the same stuff over and over and over again on the off hope that something I can use will drop, and it's going to very slightly increase my stats. Very, very slightly. And then there's the time-gated stuff, like the Legendary Daggers and Warlords of Draenor. You literally have to run the same fucking raid for 3 months to do that. And the only time you're not inside the raid is between the stages to do some solo content. And yes, the solo content was janky as fuck, and the latency that they added with the server has really caused me a lot of problems. But that solo content was the only time in the game where I felt like I was actually engaging content to get this legendary item. It's literally like hunks of Deathwing you ripped off of him. And then you get the legendary item, and you do a little bit more damage, but then like that's it. Like that's supposed to be like the biggest highlight of the game up to that point is you picking up this orange item and being able to use it. But really all it amounts to is you slightly increased your numbers. But this is also basically at the end of the game's that expansion's progression too. So, you know, ideally you'd then be able to do, you know, heroic difficulty stuff much more easily because your damage is higher, but you're still slaved behind your guild not being terrible, which I wasn't so fortunate in this case because I could sign on another character that had no gear, walk in, do more damage than half the guild in their best in slot gear. That's generally the experience in these things. So, you know, at that point, it's like it invalidates all the time I put into that game. Like it invalidates all the time I put into the guild and stuff. There really isn't other opportunities or reasons for me to pursue some other guild that will progress more because it doesn't actually amount to a tangible benefit. Like, okay, I might get better gear and heroic gear and experience some different mechanics in the same fights, but I don't understand the draw of just making numbers bigger. But apparently a lot of people do enjoy that because you have games like Diablo 3 and Clicker Heroes that are popular.
I'm definitely not really attuned to the clicker game community, that's for sure. I don't know, like, any type of mindless interaction doesn't feel to me like it's... Well, it doesn't really feel particularly engaging, that's for sure. So when I see... I don't know, because whenever I play a game that's like... I generally actually prefer single-player content in general. That's why I make campaigns as opposed to melee mods most of the time. Like, I have made some melee stuff. I have made some cooperative stuff. Like, most recently, the project that I'm mostly invested in now is a cooperative remake of the existing campaigns because the idea is that I wanted to be able to play some challenging RTS with a second player as opposed to just playing single player.
Something I've noticed over the years is a lot of people have asked for co-op campaigns, but a lot of people are not really willing to develop them.
Well, I think that the problem is a lot of people there have been like 3 or 4 different popularized attempts. I say popularized with a lot of air quotes because I just mean that they posted them on fucking ModDB and then forgot about them like 3 months later. But
ModDB.
The idea that people are asking for this kind of content doesn't surprise me because the existing content is so low effort that it basically goes for... it's just duplicating the existing base that the players have, and that's it. You duplicate the bases. Like, for example, you remember the first mission after the Terran tutorial where you meet Raynor halfway through the map and it takes like 5 minutes and all you have to do is build 10 Marines. So most people, they think a co-op overhaul, sure, will duplicate the bases and the starting units. And that's all they do for all of the maps. And sometimes they'll add in like, oh, we'll run Zerg campaign insane 3 times and break the AI. And like that's their idea of like actually designing a co-op overhaul. So when I looked to design my own, I had actually in the past created a relatively low effort co-op overhaul where at least I was re-terraining stuff and adding certain doodads and such, with the idea being that I wanted to make the maps more enjoyable to play, but I wasn't touching AI. I didn't really have any ideas about AI. So I wasn't at all familiar with how that was supposed to be at that point. This is back in like 2011. But since then, I've decided, okay, well, if I'm going to make a co-op overhaul, it's going to be an actual overhaul. So I actually combined 2 really short maps. The first 2 maps, I combined them and removed like useless shit, like tips and tutorials and stuff about just stuff that players should already know. And I made the maps a lot more challenging. And the whole idea was that these are an actual challenge. If you play with an APM of 5, you're not going to be able to win. You should expect to be able to...
How many butthurt comments have you gotten about maps being hard? It's probably a lot, isn't it?
It's way more than I thought.
People hate challenging games. Like, they really, really hate it. That's why Blizzard's idea of challenge is just to increase numbers very slightly, because casuals get upset if they have to lick the window 3 times as opposed to 2.
It's just
I'm not even joking. Like, you want to know why? You're looking at World of Warcraft and you're talking about how there's like nothing attacking or anything or doing anything. The number one reason why it's like that is because people complain if stuff does stuff. Like that's literally it. The training, you can train things and leash them really, really far in World of Warcraft, but there's some specific things you can't. For example, Kazakh. Anybody who's familiar with World of Warcraft knows where I'm going with this. There was a raid boss called Kazakh. And Kazakh had some very interesting mechanics. Like, for example, he was a world boss, and if you had more than 40 people, he basically just went berserk. And I believe it was if he hit something, or maybe if he killed someone, he gained a lot of health off of it. Well, as it turns out, you can just train stuff indefinitely across the map, as long as you keep hitting it. So you just train Kazakh from his location and like across 3, 4, 5 zones, put him inside of Stormwind City. He will just sit there until a GM comes and removes him, and just keep killing every single person that was there. Or Lakeshire was another popular one. I actually have an old video that's been released a long time ago, the Assault on Lakeshire, whatever, one of those classic videos. Very entertaining because you got this giant demon just walking around. He cast Shadow Bolt Volley. It will kill every lobby in this massive radius. It was hilarious. Casuals got very, very angry. Very angry. Teramis, the Devourer, another dragon that I forget what he did, but he would get trained in places too. Something in HKS and I did is we pulled Morbid Fell, level 30, not very high level, but he was invulnerable. We pulled him all the way across Duskwood into Goldshire Inn. Some lobbies got very angry, even though like it's just like this guy who's sitting inside the inn just attacking NPCs and stuff. He's not actually like killing them or anything unless they try to kill him, and they're complaining because it's. Oh, it was great. I wish I was recording videos back then. It was amazing. But Blizzard had a couple of events throughout time. And
well, I remember the very famous one where everybody got plagued.
Yeah, I wasn't
spreading space aids or whatever.
I wasn't active. I believe that was a debuff from Zul'Gurub or something that would spread, and it came out. So to elaborate on that, this actually plays right into this because people got pissed off about this too. There was a couple buffs, not as destructive as the plague, but that would kill a very large number of people depending where you put them. So there was a boss inside of Molten Core. He put something called Living Bomb that Blizzard has used in pretty much every game over and over and over and over again because they love it so much for some reason. He could put that on a pet or something. You could dismiss it and pull it out inside the auction house, and then it would explode and kill everyone inside of there. Another one was Burning Adrenaline. They would put that on a pet, or they put that on you, and it would reduce all of your cast times. So you could cast your Hearthstone, Hearth to the end next to the auction house, run into it, and explode. And kill everyone inside of it. It was, I love watching that. Like, I just idle in front of the Ironforge auction house, just watching. Every now and then someone would run and explode, like 50, 60 people would die. And people would get so pissed off. Even though it was like a 1 minute run maximum back to their body, they would get so angry. And Blizzard did their darnest to prevent this kind of stuff from happening. And then there was the Legion pre-event. I believe I have some recordings or screenshots of this, but at least I was sitting there watching it. So in the Legion pre-event, you could walk around town and talk to NPCs and stuff, and it could turn you into a Dreadlord. And the Dreadlord, as a Dreadlord, you had a minute or so until it just automatically killed you. You were basically like a raid boss, and you were hostile to other players. So naturally, this meant that people would run into the auction house and kill every single person in it. Oh, were people so mad. There was so much anger. It was beautiful.
So why was that even added to the game in the first place, though? Like, what is...
I think that Blizzard just, like, on one hand, like, Blizzard's constantly been pushing away from world PvP and stuff. They've done their darnest to kill world PvP. They've done their darnest to make sure that, you know, you can't disrupt other players. And then they add something like this. And
yeah. It seems like
really
some
sure.
rogue agent Ghost in the Machine type move or something. I don't know.
Well, when you've got a company that's consisted of like 800,000 Pajits and a bunch of dogs, someone's going to just want to get back at their player base. Like, look at Ghostcrawler. Like, he got back at them. Now he's in Riot. He literally did nothing besides suck dicks for a living, and he still has a job. Look at Dustin Browder. EA kicked him out and said, "You're useless. You shit all over our franchise." And Blizzard sucked him right up, and he put orcas in StarCraft. If that isn't a fuck you to EA, I don't know what is.
Oh my god. Oh man.
It's all just, that's how petty these people are. I mean, you know all about Jay Wilson.
No, actually, Jay Wilson's one guy who's eluded me completely. What's up with him?
Jay Wilson was, he said, fuck those guys, and shit to Blizzard North, who went to make Hellgate London.
Oh, yeah.
Good show. He's responsible for Diablo 3, so when you look at that train wreck, that's him. He actually came from World of Warcraft, and I believe he got demoted back into World of Warcraft. I'm surprised he still has a job, but, I mean, the same could have been said about Metzen until they fired him.
Yeah, I like how he retired at 42, by the way, thus proving forever that the world is a fucking simulation.
Quote-unquote retired. Blizzard, basically what happened with Metzen, Blizzard realized that Metzen doesn't actually do anything, but they're paying him an insane sum because he's a veteran employee. Blizzard realizes, hey, the Metzen formula is purple and green. Let's just have an intern do it. We can pay him a fraction of the price. We'll fire Metzen for something stupid. We write it off as him retiring because, you know, you put him under a contract, he says anything bad about the company, and come to lawsuits. So, you know, he retired, quote unquote, and now we pay somebody like $10 a year. They write the exact same drivel that Metzen does, the players never notice the difference.
Well, it's hard to notice a difference in that context, man.
It really is.
You're asking them to compare Fel plus Void with Void plus Fel. How could anybody keep track of that?
Abyss and Chaos and Doom. Something I want to do is I want to go through Legion's campaign, at least, you know, to extent of what I have patience for. And I'm going to grab quotations of all the dialogue. Because World of Warcraft...
How dare you, mortal!
World of Warcraft is home to some truly despicable dialogue, but Legion is like... You can't even put it into words. It's unfathomable.
I have seen some pretty choice excerpts so far. There's this... I was just in the middle of, like, running around... I'm basically been mindlessly doing quests for this past, like, hour or whatever. And one of the things that I just did was... What was it? I walked into this area without getting a quest, and some event happened that basically involved Bane Bloodhoof, son of Karen Bloodhoof, who looks like a real fucking edgelord, by the way. He oh shit, I'm spinning.
Meat spin?
Something like that. I fell like halfway down.
That's my fetish.
I saw Bane show up, and he said, he like revealed himself to Grim Totem, and let's just say the rest was history. But that's apparently a scripted event that's supposed to happen after you've already accepted a quest somewhere, which I did not know.
Well, you know, I went into Felwood, and it's like, put MC in the bag, and I'm like, I don't have a bag. This is obviously for a quest of some kind.
Yeah.
Like, the game never used to be that fucked up.
Well, I just had
lots of problems.
I just had to go back to the same thing, redo the same event, re-kill the same guy who's like apparently some NPC that's like not supposed to respawn. And then I went all the way back to the I walked all the way back to the place where I was supposed to meet him, and because it was under attack or something, he was gone, and in his place was a portal that I couldn't go through. And then some Alliance guy ran into a wall while a Tauren shot him repeatedly for no damage, and then he disappeared eventually. So I honestly don't know what the fuck was going on this entire time, but...
It sounds like Blizzard.
I came back here after walking like halfway across the entire world space, and finally was able to turn in the quest, so it seems like reloading him worked or something.
As far as bizarre Blizzard interactions are concerned, something I'd like to always remind people of that I talked about in my previous rant video is you could spell reflect flame patches on the ground. So there is a boss in Tempest Keep called Alar. He'd put fire on the ground, and people are bad. Like, they like standing in fire.
Yeah, that's so dumb though. Like, why do people even allow
kill it with a spell reflect ability? Like, it would kill itself by you standing in it.
Oh my god.
And so what we had to do in order to kill the boss is HKS would just stand on the flame patches and kill them with spell reflect, and then we would kill the boss because then the casuals couldn't kill themselves.
Wow.
It was that like back then I couldn't really do too much video recording, and I'm really ashamed because there would be just timeless footage out of that experience.
Oh my goodness. I'm flying past what is actually a straight vertical 90-degree pillar of BSP height
Oh yeah.
plus
Yeah.
terrain. I'm in Thunder Bluff. I just flew away.
They fixed some of the more busted shit that I've seen, but if you go into my Shanktarian videos, I think maybe it's season 2. There are periods in the game for many years where there was blocks of water just floating in the air, and yeah, you like I couldn't even put it into words. It's like in Swamp of Sorrows, there was like a river and then another river suspended above it, and
Yeah, that's like all their
Valley of
waterfalls,
Eternal-
though. So.
Vale of Eternal Blossoms or whatever it was. There was lots of super fucked up water in there. Sunwell, a raid they haven't touched in like a decade. Water started getting fucked up in there too and stuff. There's like billboards and stuff in bizarre places, and like this, you gotta wonder how this happens. Like everything is so deeply nestled and inlined that they change one thing and like half the game gets completely fucked.
Yeah, it's like when they somehow accidentally made a certain monster deal like 10,000 instead of 1,000 or
Yes.
something. It's just
Yeah,
so
I remember it
ridiculous.
was in I think it was in Wrath of the Lich King. We regularly would run Black Temple, which was from the previous expansion. Just like a couple of us would go in and just obliterate stuff. And mysteriously, in some patch, the Rain of Fire that these guys did just started doing like 5-6 digit damage out of nowhere, where it normally does like nothing near that. So it was just like instantly kill every single person who was near it. But their spell database is a mess. I mean, it's a mess. You can make that conclusion when they say, yeah, we have to rebuild the entire database just to remove slow from Mindflay.
Yeah, well, every time I think of their Blizzard and spell databases, I just think of Diablo 2. What is it? There's that one spell that the Paladin has, like block or something, that just crashes the game if you use it.
Everything with Diablo 2, I couldn't even begin to scratch the surface of Diablo 2, how utterly fucked that game is. Like, everything is fucked. Everything is fucked. It's hard to find things in that game that are not fucked. I just mean like graphics and visual stuff. I mean, like the code-wise, the game is utterly atrocious, especially after Peter got a hold of it with 1.8 plus, because basically Blizzard's whole concept of trying to fix things is to boilerplate, copy paste, and throw hacks on top of it, which usually results in things being even more fucked up.
Yeah, well,
Like,
they're
the
just
main
adding
menu
hacks
performs-
onto hacks. So
The main menu performs so fucking badly because it's something to do with the audio. I mean, I could dig it up if I really felt like it, but there's
the audio is
It's
what's
bad.
causing performance losses.
I
never
believe
heard of
so,
that.
in the main menu. Yeah, I think it was audio or the spider or something. Like, there's something about the main menu that's totally fucked. And then there's the stuff where people have told me that if you sent Balnet a 512 packet, you'd bring down the whole server.
Yeah, well, I did actually crash at least 3 of my friends' StarCraft 2 games while in my own custom game, spamming enough units to crash my computer. So I don't even know how that's possible. Like, what is it doing in an arcade game in single player? Well, it's not even single player. It's all
I mean,
online.
StarCraft 2, you want an example of how great StarCraft 2 is designed. Look no further than Lobby. Just add some computer players.
Yeah, that is actually insane. It's so ridiculous.
I don't even know how that's even possible. Like, this is mind-blowing.
Still happens to this day. So, still haven't figured it out. In fact, I think it would be more alarming if they did figure it out someday.
I mean, this is a company that uses Flash still, and their fucking launcher is unbelievably slow. It's just like I don't understand what apologists see in this dribble, but they see something because this company still keeps making money, and it is insane. Like World of Warcraft has a lot of problems. You know, I'll be the first one to tell you this is seriously fucked. But World of Warcraft is really, in the grand scheme of things, a pretty small offender compared to StarCraft 2 and Diablo 3. Like, it is like the bridge to reaching the ultimate fuck, which is their newest releases. And then there's the abomination that is overweight.
Well, Overwatch is definitely a game we can get into a little bit because I was talking about CSGO earlier and how I felt like way more empowered to actually play the game and enjoy myself and have some skill expression than in MOBAs, including Blizzard Dota and including League. So when you have Overwatch, you'd think that it's probably somewhat similar because it's an FPS, but it's a class-based FPS shooter, so there's always going to be some MOBA-like characteristics of it, because there's always going to be some discrepancies between the classes. So if you compare between classes, there's always going to be some power gaps. There's going to be some roles. It's almost like they took World of Warcraft classes and threw them into an FPS and saw what they could get out of it. But what's your take on how fun that game is to play and how not frustrating it is to play?
So, some individuals from CC were like, they played Overweight, and they're like, hey, if we buy you this, will you play with us? And I'm always super skeptical about Blizzard stuff, but I'm always willing to give something a try at least once. So I say, okay, I'll play with you. And I think, okay, maybe it's gonna be frustrating, maybe it's gonna be dumb, but I think of it in the same vein of World of Warcraft. At least I'll be able to play with people I know. These guys are super chill, super laid back. I've never seen them get angry. I've known them for like 15 years or something. At least we'll get some shits and giggles out of it. So I say, why not? So I get into Overwatch with them. I have never seen these people mad. And now I was like, I have never seen people this mad before. They were just always so pissed off. Overweight has two things going against it in terms of player experience. The first is the netcode is absolutely atrocious. So they have a character called Farah, and she has a rocket launcher. And I played tons of Unreal Tournament. I played Unreal Tournament with Cal players. I played, countless custom maps. I played with HKS for years and years and years and years. I knew Unreal Tournament. I wasn't necessarily very good at it, but I had lots of experience. I knew what playing this kind of a class should have been like. Overweight is nothing like that. It's so slow and really strange. The latency is like, it felt like I was on those World of Warcraft servers again, where the average latency says 80 ms, but you have like an add-on that tells you your input latency. When you actually use an ability, it gives you a like spot report, and it'd always be like 500, 600 ms because of some changes they did back when Cataclysm came out. That's what Overwatch was like. About half the rockets I fired simply did not do damage. Throw in the fact that most of the maps were just like corridor shooters. There was like no creativity in any of the maps whatsoever, and some of them were really, really bad. Like when I was playing, the game was still kind of young. It was some months ago, like half a year or so ago, and they came out with a new map, and it was just like Bloodbath. You had like just some of these maps were just impossible to make progress on against certain combinations. And
all right, so each map has their own meta basically, and that's I guess that sort of hints at the underlying issue that I think the game has, where it is about as frustrating as a MOBA to play, in the sense that
it's not even really much of a MOBA. It's like it's a lot like Assault and Unreal Tournament, if you're familiar with that. But the thing is, it's like an Assault and Unreal Tournament where the defender always has an absolutely colossal advantage, and it's super high latency, so you often get killed around corners and shit. And a lot of what you do just doesn't really work that well. Like it's I've definitely seen people play the game and do well in it and consistently in it. It really could just be like nodes between me and their server that give me such a bad experience. But I've never seen anybody actually enjoy the game. I've seen people who swear by it, but when it actually comes to seeing them play it, they don't enjoy it. It always amounts to more. It's like the penultimate frustration of League, because you get all of the frustration of the social aspect and people looking to prove themselves. You throw in the fact that Blizzard panders as fuck to a certain childlike crowd, the liberals, and then you throw in the fact that the game is actually really, really, really badly designed, because it's a shooter, and shooters are traditionally associated with reflexes and skill, precision, like mechanics. But then you throw into something where you have abilities that wipe the entire map, invulnerability, revives, all this other shit, and I don't think under any circumstance, any developer, can you make class-based shooters really work that well. The closest would be Team Fortress. Now, obviously, Team Fortress was Blizzard's inspiration, quote, 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 given they just ripped off of it completely.
No.
But Team Fortress, the class-based stuff was way more tame and way more tightly balanced. And as bad as Team Fortress has gotten today with the hats and the absurdity of microtransactions and all this other ridiculous shit, the fundamentals of Team Fortress, as far as I understand them, haven't really changed that much since Team Fortress Classic when I played. It's still fairly simple. You got the engineer, he builds turrets. You got the spy, he cloaks and changes stuff. It's class-based, and the classes are pretty rigid, but it's still ultimately fairly tame. Whereas in Overwatch, Blizzard's concept with Overwatch and in their games in general, you especially see this with like StarCraft 2 and stuff, is they want everybody to succeed. Blizzard hates skill expression. They hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it. That's why you have stuff like macro mechanics and all this other arbitrary crap where anybody can push a button and succeed. That is what Overwatch is supposed to empower. And again, this brings us back in, why is this so popular if it's so bad? Because it's so, and they like to use this word, accessible. Anybody can play, anybody can succeed. Anybody can push a button on Hanzo Zolt and kill someone behind a corner. Anybody can, you know, like I played Symmetra because I just hated the friggin' latency. And with Symmetra, I would just turn into a god. I would just lock onto people with a laser and just jump around. They couldn't hit me because of the latency, but my laser's hooked on them and murdering them. And then you place turrets around there and, you know, you just kill people. Like, you don't even need to have good netcode. You just gotta get them in your sights and bunny hop. And it is retarded. Like,
I mean, it really seems like there were... I don't know, man. The idea that you... So what does lag even represent, right? It represents like...
It's latency. Like, for example, the main reason why I stopped playing Overwatch was not just because it was a bad game. It was because Mei would cast her wall, and I would see the particle effect for the wall, but I wouldn't actually see the wall. So if I wasn't paying attention, I was just running into invisible collision, shooting at nothing. Because there was actually a wall there, but it wouldn't even appear on my screen for like a second and a half. And I would be like, okay. Like, there was so much getting killed with stuff you just couldn't even see or do anything about. Because it's like the Call of Duty shooters where everybody does a million fucking damage. But the maps are really not designed because they're not like an arena map. They're a linear objective-based map. And, you know, after you play it for a long time, you're going to get accustomed to that. You're going to know what to expect. There's only so many things people can do. But actually breaking into it is an extraordinarily toxic experience.
Right. So when I mentioned the whole lag thing, I was specifically... I'm just wondering what could possibly be the... So, like, when you lag, what it's specifically usually affecting your ability to mechanically execute. But the fact that you were still had significant success with a specific class despite being unable to execute mechanically tells me that there's some specific imbalance that really they didn't want mechanically unskilled players to feel left out by their game. You know what I mean?
That is because Symmetra's weapon locks onto you. It's like the Link gun from Unreal, except it locks onto you, which means that so long as you're in range of her, she's going to keep hitting you regardless if you're actually in the targeting receptacle or not.
I mean...
So there's a lot of really dumb shit like that. Also, the prevalence of area of effect weapons as well. And, you know, some melee classes that are insanely strong. Reinhardt is...
Yeah, well, there's a lot... I mean...
Silly. Very clunky, but silly.
It's pretty... When you see, like, professional Overwatch... Reinhardt is pick or ban every game, so...
Yep. Yeah. Well, he's super strong. He's got high utility. He's super strong. And, I mean, that's just to be expected. And, like... I'm willing to look past, like, balancing grievances and stuff like that. But as an actual playing experience, you don't get any reward out of succeeding in that game. You know, in League of Legends, when I won, it was usually because I played super, super well. I had really, really good mechanics, especially considering the fact that I hadn't really played much rank. And I would see that in the stats, because most of my games, and according to Riot's rundown, I had competitive level stats. You know, my CS, even though I didn't feel it was really that good, Riot says, hey, your stats in comparative to people in Challenger. Your stats are like professional level. You have good KDA, you have good, you know, gold income, and all this other shit. And, you know, you get that in the game because you win the game, at least when you do win, when it's actually in your power to make a difference. And then, you know, you carry or whatever, like those games where I have people disconnect and I manage to just carry, especially way back when, you know, they hadn't nerfed all the champions I played to the point they can't even play them anymore.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then you feel good about that because you made a difference and you put in the effort and you won. But even when you do that in Overwatch, it's like the game is such a clusterfuck that a lot of it just even comes down to circumstances of you winning. Like, apparently a lot of people play the game just for play of the game. Like,
Oh no.
it kind of reminds me of people telling me, people buy loot boxes just to open loot boxes. It's not the process of actually having something from it. It's not that they want some specific item from it. It's the ceremony of them opening the box. It's, as someone described to me, the adrenaline addiction, very similar to gambling. That's why there's anti-gambling, laws being considered in the European Union and stuff like that. Is because it's just the same thing as using a slot machine. There's a ceremony to it. Lights flash, camera shakes. And people with, very juvenile impulses and have no control over themselves, they develop some kind of addiction to this process.
Right.
So the entire thing is very psychological. And obviously I'm old enough and I've been exposed to this stuff so much that I'm entirely desensitized to it. So if I'm going to do something, it's because I want some kind of reward out of it. I play World of Warcraft quite a bit solo to get appearances and stuff, to farm mounts or whatever. And since I wasn't paying any money for it, it was like, well, I'll put time into this because there's still something I want out of this. But the people who actually devote to it tend to have very similar reasoning. There's something very specific they want out of it. It comes out of the experience. And for a lot of people in Overwatch, it's apparently just the process of seeing the play of the game. They want something that vindicates the time they put into it, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess it sort of feeds back into the whole idea
It's like
of
buyer's remorse.
Buyer's remorse, yeah. So you're buying this game with your time in a different way. It's not just money; it's a time investment. So you want your purchase, your investment, to not be wasted or not feel.
And
like
MMOs are insanely toxic in that regard because you're paying monthly. Like that's the whole thing goes down a psychological loophole that's very much intentionally designed to suck people into it and be like, you paid $20 a month because that's how much it costs here in Canada. It's $20 a month to play World of Warcraft, and you put in this much money, so you want to get your money's worth out of it. So you got to put in the time, but then they've set it up so it's like you can only do X or Y each day, each week. So, you got to keep paying to make your original investment worth it. Like that's the hook. That's a psychological hook that gets you into it. And I mean, marketing is a tremendous subject, but that's basically what it is. And since it's an unregulated market where nobody thinks that developers can do anything wrong, I've had people plainly tell me up front, developers can't be lazy of all fucking things. There's no one saying, this is toxic, maybe we shouldn't do this. And at the same time, people who try to copy World of Warcraft to make, I guess what they would construe as a better product, they don't actually put in the effort to research why World of Warcraft is successful. The good points about it, the bad points about it, and actually try to make an improvement of that product. All they tried to do is ride their success. They copy it off of it. And it's like, oh, look, it's World of Warcraft, but it's better. But it isn't better. And anyone who plays it sees that. That's why you've had countless MMOs come out that people are like, oh, this is going to be the next WoW killer. And then they just fall flat on their ass. Like, look at Guild Wars 2. What a goddamn fucking disaster.
Guild Wars 2 is the one that had like single player focused content as accessory content, right? Or is that Guild Wars 1?
I wouldn't really call it a focus, but more that it enabled it.
Yeah, well, there was an element of it where you could focus on the player could focus on it if you wanted to.
Yeah. Like, especially when they released Nightfall, Guild Wars lets you put bots in your party, and you gear them, and you can configure their abilities, and you can control them to an extent. And you basically can go through the entire game with that, especially since they did a patch much later on that enabled you to have all heroes in your party. So I'm doing an LP of Guild Wars, or I was until, real life started becoming a complete little clusterfuck. And, Guild Wars is super grindy. Like, it I would say in terms of raw repetition, it actually exceeds World of Warcraft at this point. To complete, like, reach maximum level and see all the story content, it's you probably put less time in it than you would World of Warcraft, but the content is even more repetitive. But you have more control over it, and that in itself lends to a more positive experience. So yeah, but Guild Wars 2, it was like Guild Wars 2 when they made it. They didn't actually look at Guild Wars 1. They had entirely new staff. They looked at, like, they had names of stuff. They're like, oh, we got Char, they're cat people. We got humans. We got gnomes from World of Warcraft. And we're going to put these in here, and then we're just going to make World of Warcraft, but with an action RPG combat system that doesn't have any finesse or flexibility or depth to it whatsoever, because we don't want to scare our casual audience. So a lot of people that played Guild Wars 1, they played it for the PvP. Guild Wars 1 had a pretty extensive PvP system. Back when it came out, a lot of people would tell me that it had a stronger PvP system than World of Warcraft, and Guild Wars was like the only real contender for World of Warcraft, at least in the West. And it was because of the PvP system. But just between you and me, I couldn't get over the fact that Guild Wars' controls were so goddamn clunky, and there was so much rubber banding and shit to do PvP in that game. I couldn't stand it. But I know a lot of people who did enjoy it, and it is a big subject to get into, and because it did have a lot of stuff in it. But now it's just all bots and win traders, just like World of Warcraft.
Yeah,
everything always devolves into the same thing.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like anything that was made. Well, I don't even know if MMOs are even in the market at all anymore. It feels like they have no market share anymore.
World of Warcraft is still big. Like it's dropped, but it's still big. Final Fantasy 14 is picking up, and but the thing is a lot of new MMOs came out that all flopped really bad.
Right, that's what
Black Desert Online, Arcade, and stuff like that. Like they look promising, they promise a lot of things, and then they get sucked into that westernization mindset of add microtransactions to everything, make it pay to win, go for the whales. Basically, Riot's and Blizzard's current marketing scheme. What keeps World of Warcraft and stuff like it afloat is Blizzard's logo is still very big, and a lot of people still are under the misguided belief that it has a Blizzard logo on it, so it must be good. So they end up giving Blizzard money, and even if those people didn't exist, there's still enough whales feeding them through overweight that they could keep the entire company afloat for like another 50 years, considering they invest maybe like $20-30 into actually developing the content.
It just seems to me that there's got to be something really wrong with the way things are right now, and I'm trying to figure out.
Obama put fluoride in the water. That's what's wrong. It's turning the frogs gay.
Yeah. Holy moly! I just got a nasty sight. Looked at some grass. Whew, that was a mistake. Boy. Yeah. So, I guess when it comes to like one thing that I invested a little bit of time into, I think maybe only 80 hours. It's not that much time in the grand scheme of things, but is within a very short period of time, was Path of Exile, Diablo clone. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I was invited by somebody who was closely related to the developers to participate in the alpha or beta. I played it about 15 minutes and never looked at it again. Because I basically was a ranged unit, and I started the game, and I thought, hey, this looks like shit. Because it's just stretched, fucked up UVs and everything everywhere, and the particles look like ass. And I was like, okay, well, I'll try out the game. So I started attacking things. They walk up to me, they stall. They walk up to me a little more, they stall. They walk up to me a little more, stall. They look in the wrong direction, and I kill them. Like, this AI, quote unquote, is even more fucked up than Diablo 2. This first impression is the worst that this game could ever possibly give me, and I just didn't touch it again. If a game can't catch me within like the first 5 minutes of me starting it and says, hey, I put effort into this title, then it's just not worth my time. You know, like Nier Automata, I gave that game 20 minutes of my time, which was 20 more minutes than what it deserved, because it's a bunch of fucking mini games, unskippable cinematics, you know, really bad voice acting, and just bullshit. And then when we actually get into the action RPG portion, we see the exact same fucking thing we see in every other shitty action RPG. Big telegraphic bosses, shitty reads, inaccurate collision, and just dullness. And it's like, nope, this just isn't worth my time.
See, I'm not at all familiar with Nier Automata, but I keep hearing. Well, recently there was I think we actually showed you some of it. There was a StarCraft 2 campaign that was made.
Oh God!
that
I had forgotten about that. I'd prefer to not think about that.
So there was a StarCraft 2 campaign that was made in homage to it, or something like that. It's supposed to be something to do with it. And
didn't remind me of it at all.
Well, I have no idea. I don't know why.
Hey, look, we used music from Nier, so we're a Nier game. We're gonna throw in stuff from Legacy of the Void because Legacy of the Void was such a good and inspiring piece of work to pull shit from.
It definitely seems. This is actually an interesting topic that a friend of mine came up with, or they brought up while I was talking with them. And one of the things they said was, why is it that all of these that StarCraft 2 campaigns that take from the lore of StarCraft 2, maybe it's just by proxy of them being in the engine, but their stories feel way more offensive than like the most crazy bad fan fiction written in StarCraft 1 campaigns.
This is because the people who have the patience to go through StarCraft 2's editor are people who don't know any better. people who are apologists and think they're actually really going to accomplish something meaningful with it, which means these are almost always going to be the same people who actually think StarCraft 2 has a good story, which means they're actually looking at it for inspiration. That is why. People look at the way StarCraft 2 does it, and they think it's actually a good story. They actually think it was written well and designed well. So they're going to use that as the fount from which they pull their creative energy to create their project, which means, by extent, their creative project is going to be disgusting.
It definitely seems really awkward to me anytime I see attempts at storytelling done. At least so far, I haven't... Like, it's hard to compare it to the only other StarCraft 2 campaign I've played any degree of length in was Annihilation. And that campaign was not set in StarCraft 2's or StarCraft setting at all. It had nothing to do with it. It was like, well, it loosely was. There were Terran, Zerg, and Protoss, but it had nothing to do with like the main story. It was all in these new factions. So I'm not really sure much about it. Like, so, it seems to me like it was designed to be its own, more or less its own setting with just the races intact. Like, it even threw in a bunch of new units and stuff, so it wasn't really designed to be like super immersive or didn't carry over stuff from the original games at all, like the stories of the games. So that was
way to do it.
That's very different than, for example, the games that try to be like sequels to Legacy of the Void or whatever. Like the campaigns that try to be like, oh, this is a campaign that it takes place at the same time as this event in the main story, or something like that.
You can polish a turd as much as you want; it's still a turd.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's any way to make the story of StarCraft 2 more palatable. I feel like it's just the way that it is, and you're really just you're better off just pretending it never happened.
You're better off just having nothing to do with StarCraft 2. Like, regardless of the story, if you're trying to work with StarCraft 2, you're basically subjecting yourself to an untold amount of anguish for no gain whatsoever. Because no matter how good of a developer you are, no matter how much time you put into it, what's going to come out is going to be held down. It's going to be less than what it could have been by extent of what you're using to create it.
Yeah. I would definitely agree with that. I mean, when you're using the regular game from like Brood War, you're still making a lot of concessions anyways, because you have you have to sort of fan con shit. You have to be like, yeah, the setting is way more expansive than you initially thought. There were like something in the manual of the original game had something to do with what was it? It was like the Protoss Empire spanned thousands of worlds. It said some line about that. And then in the campaign, Ire falls and there are no more Protoss. So where the fuck do they all go?
When you read into StarCraft setting whatsoever, you will immediately throw up. Nothing about it makes any sense whatsoever. It is just Warhammer 40k that Metzen took and changed just as little as he could to avoid getting sued. And then the rest of it is just bullshit on top of bullshit on top of bullshit. It is all a goddamn disaster. Look no further than the Terran population. And
yeah.
Brought that up before. Like that's an excellent starting point of how nauseatingly badly designed this world actually is. And okay, so the foundation's bad. Maybe you can work with it and make something better. But Blizzard's strategy, as opposed to actually doing something meaningful with the world, is to just keep retconning until it suits their current fancy. Primal Zerg!
Don't say that.
That entire frigging sequence just... It was bad. It was emotionally traumatizing how anybody thought that was a product that could be released.
Lardcon.
Lard.
I mean,
okay. You know, if you have a bad setting or a bad whatever, you can still carry it with good dialogue, like Bulletstorm. Bulletstorm, not a shred of that was original or captivating whatsoever.
Yeah.
But it had good dialogue. So it's still, a meaningful experience. And still to this day, years and years later, I think, why can't a game had a reasonable story? And I think, well, no game I've played has an actually good story behind it. But there's games with good dialogue that carry themselves in the way that the game experience is not degraded as a result. And Bulletstorm is one of those. And Blizzard's writing at its absolute worst is always in the dialogue. the dialogue is just basically a bunch of random lines strung together that none of the voice actors even attempted to act out. Kerrigan is really bad for this, and Raynor. They just always sound so dispassionate about everything that's going on in any line of dialogue.
You talking about both games or just StarCraft 2 here?
StarCraft 1, I don't remember being too bad, but not really great. I would say it's just like, just average. But StarCraft 2 is terrible for this, and Diablo 3 for that matter. Like, Blizzard just doesn't have any quality control whatsoever, and I don't imagine they even tell their actors what they're voicing for.
Yeah, like what the context is or any direction.
Yeah.
It certainly doesn't seem like that. Distinctly what I remember is the first mission of the Heart of the Swarm, where you have Kerrigan commenting on the fact that her Zerglings are getting attacked by gas turrets. And you're like, she goes, that gas is hurting my Zerglings. And it's like, you're halfway dispassionate, and you're sort of like belying that you give a shit. And it just doesn't sound right at all for the setting. Like, for what's actually happening. Or, like, any of the battle dialogue that happens in the next mission, where it's like,
horrible.
Umojins are, like, talking about how the Dominion is just shoveling units into their base. And they're just like, we gotta move. Come on. It's like, what are you doing, man? You trying to ask me out to dinner or something? Or are you trying to tell me that there's a big fight going on? You gotta make up your mind.
Yeah, it's terrible. Like, they should have just avoided having dialogue, because everything they added just detracted from the game that much more.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I just there's like a certain okay, for one thing that I will say, that there's like the only thing that I can say is that I haven't played an RTS outside of something that Blizzard has made that is, I won't say enjoyable to play, but like the foundational mechanics of it are.
I have Conquest Frontier Wars.
Oh, I haven't heard about that one, man.
You probably wouldn't have heard about it, because that game is basically a StarCraft ripoff, but it's gameplay wise, it's very different though. Like, the writing and stuff like that is very StarCraft, but I can't really speak too much for the campaign, because I'd only played a little bit of it, and I didn't think it was really that good. But the skirmish and stuff like that was decent. Although AI is very buggy. It's actually like Armies of Exego as well is very Brood War based.
Yeah, I remember Armies of Exego being somewhat enjoyable.
So
but
those are two I'd really pull out.
Yeah, like they have some promise, but staying power, like it's just been Brood War for me. Like, actually, I recently rediscovered Warcraft 3 in a weird sense, where I was like watching. We had a conversation about this on the Discord server. Where I was talking about like Warcraft 3's meta seems really weird now and really wanky, and like you compare that to Brood War, and it's pretty obvious to me which one is superior, like which one I enjoy more. But there's like an element of just like pure weirdness that it's like, why does that exist? Why is this the case? And it does.
Warcraft 3 is very niche.
Yeah,
is a good way to put it. It's not an RTS, but it's like an RTS, and then half the things that go on in it are just really strange, which is its own charm. But at the same time, you can see most certainly why it did not succeed as a professional game, especially compared to like Brood War. And I don't think that it was like a good step to take coming from Brood War. Like, if you had experience on your development side from Brood War, there's no reason that you should have ended up with Warcraft 3. Like, there's way too much in Warcraft 3 that is just so fucked up that should never have happened. Like the pathfinding and responsiveness and stuff like that is just absolutely atrocious.
Yeah,
and
the pathfinding in particular really confuses the shit out of me, because it does. Well, there's no real. The other thing is that really in none of Blizzard's games, besides maybe Overwatch, you can make an argument for use 3D to any degree, right? So,
yeah,
like
Overwatch is still very 2D though. You have some rooftops and stuff like that, but when you think of a shooter and you think of 3D, you immediately think of like Unreal Tournament and Quake and stuff.
Yeah.
And Overwatch has nothing on those. There's nothing even enters the shadow of actual like arena kind of shooters.
Yeah, I've got no
I don't know why Warcraft 3 is 3D other than because 3D is trendy, so it's got to be good. I've had people try to defend 3D and say 3D is good because it's 3D. And, the same kind of people who think that games are art. And when you make a 3D game, you sacrifice such a tremendous amount. You sacrifice readability, you sacrifice performance. You're going to just have a long, long road to get up. And I think there are some games that are 3D that worked out okay, like Conquest Ventura is actually 3D, but it doesn't have an attempt to use the Z-axis. It's still very much a 2D playing field. It's just the units are 3D, and it looks very dated as a result. When you make a 3D game, you effectively date it. Sprite-based games like Brood War, R-Type 3, stuff like that, they basically don't age. The resolution stays small and stuff like that, but a lot of these games, even when you upscale them, as so long as the art was done well, it looks relatively decent. And StarCraft 1 is a testimony to that, because you look at StarCraft 2, it's a fucking mess, and nobody looks at StarCraft 2 and thinks that looks good unless they've been like huffing fluoride or something. But Brood War today, you don't need to have professional experience in Brood War to be able to read it like you do in StarCraft 2. It reads well, and then it looks well, and it looks believable, and looks consistent.
Well, the thing about Brood War is that everything...
Overwatch, it's just a clusterfuck.
Yeah, it's very easily like... it's sort of like Counter-Strike, where even if you don't know anything about it, you look at it and you sort of figure it out. Like, Counter-Strike, it has some niche elements to it, like it's grenades or whatever, that you do need some element of game knowledge to understand how some of those things work, but... You look at like the actual gameplay. It's just okay. That guy shot that other guy in the head, and now he's dead. So like you sort of know that very intuitively. But
about camping and the different weapons and stuff like that. Like Counter-Strike is one of those games that has a very it's a lot like Brood War and has a very low entry barrier, but it has a very high skill cap to really make the most out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's like a lot of really cool things you can do if you're really good, and. I don't know. I haven't really found a shooter that's anything like CS in general.
In terms of like CS, probably not. But in terms of having like a lot of high level stuff in it, you definitely probably want to look into Quake.
Yeah.
You probably want to look into Unreal.
Those are like really fast paced compared to CS too. And CS isn't really a slouch in the pacing department. It's just really that's not the kind of game it is.
I played against, like I said, I played against Cal player. I played a couple of matches against him. He was someone that I knew from way back in the... I knew him from SME, but it might have been CC I originally met him. And he kind of like showed me the ins and outs of like high-level play and stuff like that. And the game is ridiculous. I really wish I had the link for this because I wanted to use it for my own reference, but there was an analysis video that was for maybe Quake 3 Arena where the guy talked about... they were watching over and casting over a match that he had played, and he was explaining, what was going on and his mindset behind everything, and it was really insightful. Like the power-up control was just really on point.
Yeah.
And knowing where his enemy is, even though his enemy is almost never on screen, he knows precisely where to shoot in what doorway, and oftentimes hitting his opponent, but he doesn't like get greedy and try to chase him or whatever, even if he lands a direct hit. And it was really, really fascinating to watch. And like shooters these days aren't really like that anymore. You get in like Call of Duty with its just absurdity. I was watching a stream for AMD where the guy, he was a pretty reasonably skilled player, and he streamed PUBG. He streamed Battlefield 1, I think it was. And all these games are so terrible. So awful.
Well, I definitely don't understand the Battlefield's craze. I guess it's like they really...
It used to be good. It used to be a decent series.
Or not, sorry,
like Call of Duty.
I was thinking of PUBG. I remember Battlefield, like, what was it? 2142 is, I think, the only game I have any experience with.
I played Battlefield 2, I played Battlefield 1942, I played Battlefield Vietnam. Vietnam was the last good title. That series was dead after that. They're just milking it because, hey, we have a shooter, and it's popular. They also killed all their single-player support. They stopped supporting bots to, like, 90% of their maps and all this other shit. Like, they just threw the series to the ditch and just started milking the fuck out of it like Ass Invasion does with Call of Duty. And Call of Duty was also a series that used to have some good titles in it. But
yeah, well, the original Call of Duty games were certainly very different than the current ones. And actually, one of my chatters, Balethal, brings up a good point where he's talking about the cover system craze that they went through, and how they were very focused on like start and stop cover.
Yeah, lock-in cover is what it's called.
Yeah,
And
like Gears of War,
lock-in
etc.
cover is I played Killzone 2 and 3, and lock-in cover drove me fucking nuts in those games. It is so annoying. And then
Well,
I
it's
played
sort of like
Hunted.
squads in RTS. It really takes control away from
Yeah,
the player. You don't have
it
any
does.
finesse to the movement all of a sudden because now you have
Yeah.
like you're battling systems instead of the enemies.
Yeah. So I don't know how many of my LPs you've watched, but there was a game called Hunted: The Demon's Forge. It was published by Bethesda, but it wasn't actually developed by Bethesda. So Bethesda, of course, not well known for publishing high quality titles. I think Hunted is actually probably the strongest title in their roster, though.
Yeah, I
But the
played
game
Hunted and watched your playthrough of it, so I'm
it
fairly
has a
familiar
lot
with
of
it.
problems in it though, and like the controls are kind of janky, and there's a lot of repetition and stuff like that. But really, like at the top of my complaints with that game has got to be lock-in cover. It is like it's horrible, it's awful, and it got me killed a lot within Killzone as well. It's really just a pain in the ass. It's definitely like a console thing, I think, because like there's a lot of these games come from consoles, and like Overwatch is from consoles, Diablo 3 is from consoles. When you look at the systems that they have, like how Diablo 3 only lets you have like 6 abilities, all that's from the console restrictions. All that's been designed from a console for a start, and I'm pretty sure no lock and cover and stuff like that comes from it because you don't have as much control. You know, when you had, I think it was Halo, they had professional console players play against PC players, and they got obliterated, just utterly obliterated. Not because they were terrible players, but because the control scheme they had just wasn't even comparable. And I am really a firm believer, and I say this having played like Perfect Dark and GoldenEye and other shit for years and years and years. Shooters don't belong on consoles. It's just
Well, you need so much fine control that you don't get with
yeah.
a joystick or whatever.
You sacrifice control or you sacrifice game depth. Is really what it comes down to. And for almost every single console shooter, you have to have some kind of aim assist in it because it's really, really hard to wrestle the controls. And I can't remember how much aim assist Perfect Dark has, but I know at one point I had gotten really good with it. I came back to it like a year or two later. It was like I'd never even played the game before. Because it's like the controller, you have to orient your controller in very different ways that kind of fight the way you normally would play a shooter. Where it's not really based on reflexes, it's more like leading in a way. You have to kind of put your crosshair in a way where someone's going to walk into it. And that's not even, going through my capture card. Obviously, playing on the capture card with latency makes this like 1,000 times worse. But
Yeah.
it's still just like there's good shooters on the consoles, but I can't help but think, these would be way better on the PC without the kind of shit you have to make for the consoles to actually be reasonably successful with a shooter.
Right. Well, if you made it for PC instead of making it for console, I'm sure it would be a much superior title in terms of its controls or whatever. I also think that generally speaking, when you have, I mean, that's definitely true for RTSs. Like we all know about Halo Wars, and how anytime you make an RTS and you don't have fucking a stop command or a hold position command, you don't actually have a command card for your units in general. They all have one ability. It's like it reminded me of when I was reading some developer interview with guys who made Planetary Annihilation, and they explicitly, one of the things that they explicitly stated, he's like, well, I didn't want to give units upgrades or abilities because I wanted to remove micro from the game. Like he actually says this as his core design philosophy. That's like
thing. This is a great thing that you bring up because this is not just the opinion of one person. People who play Supreme Commander in those kinds of games do not like micro at all. So within Supreme Commander, if you watch a high-level match and you see the commanders moving around the beginning of the game, what you're going to actually see them doing a lot is they're going to be sniping trees with Reclaim to get resources off of them. Because as you're moving around, you can do this, and you have a little bit of, slow down and speed up on your unit that you can actually like snipe these trees while you're still moving if you do it quick enough. That alone, people hated that. People in that community hate any kind of unit control. Their ideal game, and I watched tons of Supreme Commander replays. I was into modding in that game way back, and I watched tons of replays. The average game for Supreme Commander is for people just to waypoint factories into each other's base, and that's it. In the absolute highest level games, and this is where the little one came from, is to try to snipe power buildings and stuff like that. And I played against a guy who claimed he was a high level player, and I would never win against him. And I just fast tagged the tier 3 bombers and just sniped his shit. and that was considered like a high level play because there's very, very little actual control in that game. You can be professionally successful in that game with under 100 APM, and people thought that 100 APM was spamming and was like too fast for a game. I read a bunch of games because basically people in that community hate StarCraft. Like universally, they just despise StarCraft because they look at a video of a Korean, they see a camera on his hands, and his hands moving fast. Like, oh my god, it's too fast. It's just a spam fest. Click on your anus. There's no skill.
Yeah, the idea that they call high APM games or just active games in general spam fests. The idea that what is a spam fest? It's something that's like mindless. It's mindless repetitive actions. But these are things that if you screw up, you lose the game because of them. They're not mindless. Or it doesn't even. It's not like a single fuck up either. But it will get to the point where you go for.
It was one of those games that had a lot of like kind of interesting stuff in it, but the way it was designed prohibited it from ever being a good game. Just the way that the tier and the upgrade systems worked in that game. Just the fact that micro just was really utterly worthless. The way the height map based terrain and unit projectiles worked. You can get fucked over by the dumbest things. Just a very concept of experimentals and some stuff. For the longest time when the expansion came out for that game, Forged Alliance, as a Seraphim, your commander could actually become immortal. All you had to do was get some veterancy on it and get an upgrade. And then you just regenerated so much health that nothing in the game would kill you at that stage. And you would just sit inside the enemy base and just kill him. And there was nothing you could do about it. And, like, the game has veterancy, and the veterancy is absolutely ridiculous. And since we're talking about single-player stuff, I may as well mention that the campaign for that game is also insanely retarded, where there's a lot of points where when you complete an objective, the map expands and it just throws like a billion fucking units on you. So if you don't just turtle like hell, you will just get blindsided and fail by completing an objective. There's so many instances of that. And I was doing an LP of that way long ago, like when I first started doing LPs.
Yeah, it was one of your things.
I realized this is dumb as fuck. I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
Because I'd already played through it once.
Well, I think you have an LP of it on Game.
I have an LP of Supreme Commander 2.
Yeah, okay. It was the first.
Have you seen that?
You didn't do. I have not. I saw like the first video, and there were some real amazing there were some amazing stills from your video that I captured a long time ago on my old hard drive that were just like a featureless, barren like environment, and then the trees were like 80 times the size of the units that were on screen. The units were supposed to be like tanks or something. So that was really confusing.
None of those games have any map design whatsoever. Like that's the concept of everybody's ideal RTS in that community is no map detail whatsoever. It's just a flat plane. Supreme Commander 2 was a game that was hated even by this community. So it's it is quite the game. I really recommend you check out that run.
Yeah, I'll have to start downloading it while I wait for the next WoW video. There's like some serious problems with anytime you try to remove micro from an experience, I feel like you're seriously removing something meaningful from the idea.
One of the things that really sticks with me with that game is the story and the writing and the voice acting. Like that, you should watch videos just for that. Like that game's voice acting and the 3D cinematics and stuff like that.
Is it like Exego bad or worse or?
It makes Legacy of the Void look like a game.
That's some high accomplishments.
It's good, man. The original wasn't really any better, but it didn't have these cinematics to go with it, so
yeah,
it was better in that regard. It was better by extent of not trying as hard.
Well, what I have to try and figure out here is okay. So let's see if we can wrap up the conversation here, talking about some RTS gameplay mechanics, because Baleval just reminded me about unit veterancy. And that reminds me of, I have this like shit list of RTS mechanics. One of which is unit veterancy. Another of which is like random garrisonable structures strewn about, like Command and Conquer 3 style, or I guess Command and Conquer in general probably. And it's like there's those two. There are a couple others. I'm sure they'll come to me. But unit veterancy is a big one that I think we can probably riff on for a while. Just talking about that.
Unit veterancy.
The idea that randomly some of your units are going to be significantly stronger than, like their cost, right? Like the cost of you using the unit. You have to. This is actually weird that uh, you do have to micro them to get the maximum benefits because you have to have them last hit in order to get the bonus points towards veterancy or whatever. So it actually seems really weird that anybody would remove it. Like what Balathal was saying in the chat is that why would you try to reduce micro but also have veterancy as a mechanic?
Yeah, so veterancy in Supreme Commander is actually more broken than probably anything you've seen, unless you've actually played Supreme Commander. Like I was mentioning about the Seraphim Commander, veterancy increases a whole fuck ton of stats, and depending on which unit it is in Supreme Commander is getting the veterancy, those stats can result in the unit getting like double, triple, quadruple the health.
Yeah.
So you throw this on something like this, the Commander, who for the Seraphim Commander, I believe specifically can gain a lot of upgrades. You can research stuff on it.
Yeah.
That increases its regeneration and stuff. That is why this combination was insanely strong, because you basically just all in. And you're going to get kills because all they can fight you with is their commander and little units. If they don't try to fight you with the little units, they're not going to do nearly enough damage to kill you. So they're going to be feeding you veterancy whether they want to or not, which means you're eventually going to hit those break points that suddenly, start giving you the extra health. They start giving you that extra regeneration, and then you hit this point where it's fucked. So another good example, and I had actually was researching my runs to because I had forgotten to even attempted a Supreme Commander run in the past. And I'm just walking around with a Monkey Lord, which is basically just a unit with a beam attack. And the beam attack is really just impossible to avoid. If you've got a ground unit and isn't like behind a cliff, it's going to get hit. Well, there's not many cliffs in this game, so it also steps on things to kill them. And as it's dying, because there's air units attacking it, it's killing ground units, and each time it ranks up in veterancy, its health just skyrockets. And it just skyrockets until the point the air units basically can't do anything to it anymore. And veterancy is like, the concept of veterancy is you kept this unit alive, so you should be rewarded for it. Well, okay, but in 99% of cases, it comes down to circumstances and no actions on behalf of the player. And furthermore, veterancy ends up adding so much shit onto the unit that it just throws any semblance of balance you may have had previously out of whack. Like, I remember Command & Conquer 3, like Rocket Men. You kill like one tank, you suddenly hit top rank, suddenly it's freaking insane.
Yeah.
One thing where I think veterancy did work pretty well was Age of Wonders 2. It's kind of like Heroes of Might and Magic 4. It's turn-based, and units could die pretty quickly in that. Now the default game is a mess of balance I'm not going to get into. I'm speaking specifically from my mod, where I designed the hit rates and stuff a little more reliably. There's a lot of cases where units could get instantly killed and stuff like that. So you also had tiers of units. So I felt like, okay, well, lower tiers of units, especially in a game like Supreme Commander where they basically cease to exist after a stage, these units are worthless. So I wanted to have some way of keeping them relevant in the game. I didn't balance things as heavy-handedly as Supreme Commander did, but it was like, this game has veterancy in it. You have silver medals and you have gold medals based on the experience, based on, how strong of units they killed. If a little unit that manages to kill a top unit, he's probably going to immediately hit gold. So usually what they gain out of it is like 1 or 2, 3 health points, maybe something that makes their attacks a little more accurate, something like that. That makes kind of sense in a turn-based perspective.
But yeah, well, turn-based doesn't have nearly as much of a focus on micro because you can take a fair bit of time between turns or whatever. So
yeah, it's a totally different genre. When you go into the RTS, things get a lot more messy, especially if you're looking at a large scale. Supreme Commander is supposed to be all about the large scale. So typically, veterancy really only starts to be visible when you've got the commander involved or when you've got the experimental units involved. Well, in most 1-versus-1 matches, I don't think you ever even reach tier 3 most of the time, at least not the ones I watched. The maps were basically bloodbath. Usually by tier 2, the game was decided. And, in a larger FFA, I watched a couple of FFAs that were kind of interesting, but it was still very similar. There really just isn't the kind of skill expression going on in like a Brood War FFA or even a Warcraft 3. I think Warcraft 3 really shines in larger game types. But the veterancy either ends up being overbearing or having no impact whatsoever. Like if you have a veteran tier 3 unit, it's still going to get utterly obliterated by an experimental. And if you have a veteran tier 1 unit, it's utterly worthless the second you hit tier 2. And Command & Conquer is even more retarded because of how heavily based on hard counters that game is. So all the veterancy serves to do is just extrapolate and compound an already massive issue in that game.
Yeah, I think there's like a huge issue with the idea of unit veterancy in any context where you have any context where you have a meaningful impact in the game, it's going to be way exaggerated more than it should be. Whereas, and then any context where it doesn't have meaningful impact in the game, why is it a mechanic in the first place? It's sort of like, you shouldn't
need to reward a player for succeeding. Success should be its own reward. This is the problem with these fucking achievements in all these games. You gotta shake someone's fucking hand and throw a goddamn fanfare just because they opened a goddamn menu. Like, the reason why games like shmups are super popular in Japan is because, unlike Americans, they don't view them as toys. There's a lot of cultural differences, and one of them is the pursuit of self-improvement. Some of these shmups can take you years and years and years and years just to 1cc the highest difficulty to even get through the game without using a continue. It can be extraordinarily difficult, especially if you're just starting out. And there's nothing that comes from that. The game doesn't like award you anything. You don't get like a massive explosion of fucking achievements for killing a boss. The achievement in itself is what is rewarding. You're doing it to improve yourself. You're doing it to get the high score. Like, the draw of it is so very different. And I think that a lot of Western titles did have this at points. But especially now, you know, like StarCraft 2 and stuff, people do things just to get achievements, just to get the pop-up that says, you did a good job. The game has to tell them they did a good job for them to feel any kind of return from it. And I think, like, at the ground level of that, that's what leads into things like the veterancy systems, because, you know, it only makes sense on a superficial level up until the point you start thinking from it as an actual game, because it just adds too many, you know, randomized factors to something that shouldn't have any randomization to it whatsoever, and it adds too much shit that screws up an existing balance. It's just like, when you think about a game, anytime you add a feature to a game, you've got to scrutinize that feature really heavily. You got to ask, does this feature actually contribute to the game? You know, does this synergize with every other thing I've added to the game? And if it doesn't, you shouldn't add it, because you're throwing shit onto it just to throw shit onto it over and over and over and over. I think even Blizzard realizes this to some extent, because in World of Warcraft, you know, they started reducing a shit ton of abilities. They started homogenizing everything. I think the homogenization is the wrong direction, but most people think that the removing of the abilities was also wrong direction, and I disagree with that, because so many of the fucking buttons in that game were arbitrary. You had to push them to maximize your damage or whatever, but the mere act of pushing them doesn't have any impact. Didn't have any interaction. It was literally, you push this to succeed. You know, you got to push this. Most people just macro this shit. You just push one button, it does everything for you. It didn't contribute to the game, and I think on some level Blizzard realized this. So on one hand, their changes made the game a lot more dumbed down, but on the other hand, a lot of these changes were really necessary, because a lot of this stuff existed for the sake of existing, and that's what veterancy falls under. It exists under just for the sake of existing. It only really makes sense in certain other genres, and only if you've really thought about it ahead of time. The RTS specifically is about skill expression, and on one hand, you can think of veterancy as a skill expression of, you know, I kept this unit alive, so I should get something more for it. You know, the act of winning the game from keeping your units alive is and has been sufficient enough for games that are proven to be successful as an RTS. You know, for example, Brood War and even StarCraft 2.
It definitely seems really bizarre to me that they focused so heavily on macro mechanics at first, and then they rolled to see how heavily they rolled back the overarching, like, design of the game, and now they've removed all of these.
Have macro mechanics?
Well, they do, but they changed them completely. There was a period of time where you never looked at your base at all because they removed the macro mechanics, and when that happened, people were complaining because, oh, they only looked at their army, and like they just automated all of their construction of their army through hotkeys, like control groups.
Well, that's
you know
what happens. Like, when you play something that is by nature insanely easy to play and really, really dumbed down, you're going to get accustomed to not exercising your brain. You're going to get accustomed to not really putting in the effort. So when something says, hey, you got to put in a lot more effort to succeed, people are going to naturally resent that. And, you know, for people, that's why when people come from StarCraft 1, they're like, wow, StarCraft 2 is shit. This is such an easy game. Why do you even play this? There's nothing you can do in this. Skill ceiling so low. People go from StarCraft 2 to Brood War, and they don't even understand how people can even play Brood War. They're like, wow, this game is so hard. And there's nothing actually innately difficult about Brood War at all. Maybe you like controlling dragoons down certain ramps, but
Right. Well, there's some instances where you're fighting against an antiquated game engine, but there's also instances where it's like it's more blurry than that. It's not just we're fighting, we're fighting an antiquated game engine. It could also be that these clicks that you're supposed to do are skills that you're supposed to remember, which is like ordering workers to harvest resources instead of the workers just doing that automatically because you rallied them to a rally point. You know what I mean?
That's what I mean when I say that's why a lot of these people went to MOBAs. Because, you know, while on one hand, MOBAs can be skill testing, it's mostly from the social aspect. You know, managing your team, making sure everyone's in the right spot, being aware of everything going on, being aware of what they're going to do and when they're going to do it. But as far as an actual mechanical game is concerned, anybody can play in a MOBA and be successful at it. You don't have to pay attention to anything compared to, like, you know, even Warcraft 3. Like Warcraft 3, you don't just pay attention to your hero, you gotta pay attention to your item shop, the cooldowns, you know, your resources, your expansions, your unit construction, everything else is going on. There's way more to multitask going on, and I have a lot of problems with multitasking. That's why I found success in a MOBA, because I'm shit at multitasking. I was never really that good at macro. I got better by extent of playing for a really long time. But I played macro games for way longer than most of these people have even been alive at this stage. You know, since like 1999. So, you know, I get accustomed to it over time. And then the game makes the bar lower. Like StarCraft 2 makes the bar so much lower than Brood War. Brood War, you have to go back to your base and actually do stuff. You have to actually interact with what's going on.
Yeah, you have to use the camera hotkeys and do all this stuff.
Hotkey and smash a button and that's it.
Yeah.
So it detaches you from it. And then when you try to go back, you've actually become a worse player. Even if you became a better StarCraft 2 player, you're going to become worse of a Brood War player because you have settled into a mindset that is less demanding and encourages you to be less demanding. And a lot of people will never actually look back from that. They'll just be like, well, it's too much work to get into this, so I'm not going to bother doing it. And I see that a lot in development as well. You know, I did things this way and it was very easy, so I don't want to do anything. Even though to succeed in whatever it is they're trying to do, you have to improve. Like, when I wanted to get into polygon modeling, I had started off with Rhino 3D and NURBS. To get into polygon modeling, to actually have to worry about poly counts and edge flow and all this other shit, that was basically something I just had entirely ignored up to that point. I didn't want to do that. I had to relearn every single skill that I had learned in 3D up to that point for like 3 years. But you got to do that too, because you can't use NURB models inside Warcraft 3 or any of these other games I was putting assets into. So you have to basically relearn everything. So I think as long as people are open to it, then, you know, that's not an issue. Because different genres are going to demand different skill sets. If you're playing a lot of different games, it's going to be an issue that you're going to overcome. But a lot of people just aren't willing to actually do that.
It's definitely a case where I think a lot of people have problems adapting, right? Like I was talking about this StarCraft 1 project that I'm working on, where it's a heavy amount of challenge increase, and there are plenty of people in the chat who have actually have played this campaign, or this project, so they know sort of what it's all about. Maybe they can speak to it, but a large portion of it is not casual friendly. It's not entry level, you know, and even people who just play, who don't have a desire to improve at the game, will not, like, if they don't want to try harder, if they don't want to be a better player, then they're not going to find a lot of success, or there's really not a lot there for them. It's not designed for those kinds of players. But there's so little content developed in the space now that a lot of people are always going to try and check out all of the content that's made, because there's so few of it that's made out there. And I think that something can be said about, in a similar fashion, about games like RTSs, where there are so few RTSs made that real RTS junkies are going to try and find every RTS that's been made and play them, like especially ones that are made new, and play them and see if they can find anything redeeming about that. And
people's standards have to drop, because the thing is companies like Blizzard, they design things to accommodate to the lowest denominator. That's how you get money. You know, if you have something that presents an entry barrier to people and they don't want to improve, they're not going to improve. They're going to find a product that tells them they don't have to improve. So what Blizzard does is they race them to the bottom of the barrel. They say, you don't want to improve? Well, that's okay. We'll make the game easier. So that's what they have been doing, just consecutively making things more and more and more brainless. Now you have Diablo 3, where it's literally the difficulties and shit don't do fucking anything in that game besides make numbers bigger. You can literally play that game asleep. Diablo 2 had many problems, and it certainly wasn't a very hard game. But there was a lot more unforgiving things that were in it. If you look in, franchises such as shmups, you look at Cave. Cave has very simple design mythology. It is, you can't beat the game, you gotta get better. It's a niche, it targets a niche set of players. Every single game that they make, they aim to make it more and more difficult. So some of these titles have taken people like 7 years for anybody to 1cc the highest, loop on. And these people go into these games for one specific purpose: to get good, to improve, to look for that challenge. And I think even at the lowest level, the simplest to casual player, inside they want to be challenged. They want something that sets them up to actually have to accomplish something. But people, especially like, modern people, I don't really want to use the word millennials, but I really don't have an easier way to describe them. People who just come in and are accustomed to developers and like Blizzard just handing them stuff and saying, hey, you've succeeded. I think inside they want to be tested more, but they're so accustomed to everything just handing things to them that they don't want to reach out and say, hey, make things more difficult. That's why Dark Souls is so popular, even though it's a really, really bad franchise. There's so much wrong with that game. But the game says, in order to advance past this point, you have to at least figure out what you're doing. You have to at least figure out what's going on. You at least have to do something correct. And then it kills you if you don't do it correctly. So many people think it's a hard game, even though it's not even that hard of a game at all. You want to see a game that's going to kill you, that's actually going to be very difficult and probably take you thousands and thousands and thousands of attempts to get through? Why not try out Bubsy 3D? That's a hard game. That kills the player. And it's comparatively as finished as Dark Souls is. But that's an old game, so it's not as good. Dark Souls is new. All this other shit. And that's without even getting into like artificial difficulty or whatever. Like, I'm not going to get into that. It's going to take too fucking long. But
yeah,
it's like, I think everybody wants to be challenged in some shape or fashion. But most developers are more interested in the people who are just going to give them money for succeeding. That's why you have pay to win. That's why you have whales. That's why you have phone games. I actually physically know people who have spent over $1,000 to get a JPEG in phone games, and then they never even got it, so they just keep spending more and more money. People who game the bonds market, people who they liquidate antique coins that their mother got from a party at their, like, I guess their mother worked in some big wig office or something for some real estate or bank or something. Got an antique coin. Oh, let's sell that on eBay for $900 and turn it into Mobage boxes. And that's what they did. So that's what powers this industry now.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of what's it called? A Pareto distribution regarding how much money is spent and who spends it. Like, I'm sure it's like the top 10% of customers spend 90% of the money that goes to these developers.
Look at Scam Citizen. People have paid $25,000 for an invisible ship and something that isn't even a game, just to be a part of it. I don't know where someone that retarded gets $25,000 from. Probably from selling their child or something. But that has happened. And now this company has this much fucking money, and they're still asking for more money. They still don't have a game.
Yeah, well,
and people are still giving them money.
It certainly reminds me of a lot of the. Well, I guess there's a reason why they call it Scam Citizen, right? Is the whole idea that they still have yet to.
Hell, here's an even more localized one. How about StarCraft Universe or StarCrafts? Both of those got $90,000. I wouldn't be able to tell you where the hell that money went because it sure didn't go into the project. Like, people just give money. Like, I don't know. Maybe people like grow up and they're like in rich families or something, and they don't really like value money that much. I'm not really sure like the psychology that leads to people spending money so brashly. But obviously, whenever I even had to spend like $20, $30, I set it on. I think for a long time, I think, is this an investment? What am I going to get out of it? How much time am I going to get out of it? I try to spend my money really wisely, but I have to spend my money really wisely. Maybe people are in more fortunate circumstances. They can afford to spend $25,000 on an imaginary ship and something that isn't even a game. But I just think, like, no matter how much money you're sitting on, the concept of dishing out something that you in many cases have worked to earn and handing it to somebody for effectively nothing, like, it boggles the mind.
There's definitely, I mean, there must be some devaluation along the way. Like I look at the amount of money that some people donate to people's like there's some stat out there that's like people with less than $1,000 in their bank account. It's like 90% of people, or some. It's not that high. It's like 67% of people. Like I'm in that fucking department. It's like I don't have money to throw around at people, so I don't know. I don't have that perspective, so I don't have the whale's perspective. But like the Pareto distribution idea is, if you're not familiar with it, is the top like not the top 90% of anything that's generated is done so by like the 10% of people or 5% of people. It's like insanely small percentage. It's like the highest trees are always like very few in number, or the largest cities are always very few in number. Like there's like 10% of cities that have most of the population. The 10% of trees have the highest amount of height because they grow the most, because they get the most sunlight or something like that. It's like the more you succeed, or the more like the better you are, the more likely it is for you to get more opportunities to continue succeeding and continue to do better. And that's like the idea that it's like an evolutionary thing. It's like it's not just in societal ideas, because it's obviously like I mentioned the trees. Like it's something that happens in nature. So the idea that you have, I'm sure there must be some sort of Pareto distribution, because like you hear all the time how the top 1% has like 90% of the wealth or something like that in America. So I'm sure there's something like that with the whales in gaming too.
Oh yeah, and that's what developers want. For Blizzard, it doesn't matter if like a bunch of people complain that this is really lazy, this is bad, voice acting's bad, writing's bad. Like they don't care, because the vast majority of people are so desensitized and so submissive that no matter how hard you cry about this or that, it's not going to actually change anything. And I'm sure that even in their own company, there are people who say that this is bad. I'm sure that's why a lot of people have left their company and try to form their own companies, is because they had some kind of self-righteous idea that, they're going to show it to the man, only to get stopped by the power of Blizzard's logo. Like Red 7, ArenaNet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these people who either got kicked out or left on their own accord and, try to strike it for themselves. You don't just drop out of something that's feeding you money for no effort. There's reasons why those happens, and I'm pretty sure a lot of them are due to egos. And
well, the interpersonal drama between like the early days of Blizzard, at the very least, I'm sure it's rivaled only by like the whole .com fiasco with campaign creations back in the day. Like there's got to be something that's like equally as bad within them, because I remember Blizzard North being such a huge fucking fiasco.
Yeah. And then you have StarCraft Ghost, Blizzard just is like, it's like a honeypot. They're like, hey, we want these developers. Let's suck who we want out of this company, and then the whole thing's going to explode. We'll just sweep it on the rug. We'll make a map in StarCraft 2 later and say, hey, here's StarCraft Ghost.
Yeah, they didn't even ship it. They were like, had some alpha build that didn't have FOV issues or something. I don't even know what happened. But there were some serious issues with like, well, we know that there were some serious issues because, of course, there were big problems with that thing you brought up earlier, StarCraft Universe, that had huge camera issues, like huge frame rate problems. So there's really there's obviously something, whatever they were using in that internal build that they showed off at BlizzCon back before StarCraft 2 released was obviously not something that was available to the public community. It's just like their fucking art tools. Oh man, just like the 2011 art tools being the only publicly released art tools that we have that are any good, and everything else has basically no documentation. Like all of these beta things.
2011? What are you talking about? They were released in 2014.
Oh yeah. Well, what I mean is like it's for 3ds Max 2011, right?
Yeah, it's for 3ds Max 2011. Although what version that I have, I believe supports 3ds Max 2016.
Yeah. Well, there were some that I got for you that were.
So those ones still aren't public, to my knowledge. That is still not actually public.
Those are.
I have been in possession of it for a long time now, and I haven't really worked with it too much, so I couldn't really tell you if there's like some underlying bugs in it. But Blizzard created Legacy of the Void. They created Heroes of the Storm. The plugin probably works. It probably works. Maybe my version doesn't work, but the version they've got works. The only reason they haven't released it yet is because they're lazy. That is how much they care about the custom content community, where some random person can ask him for the tools and you get handed it. This internal development involved with the tools, but they don't even want to release it publicly. It's literally like one intern can walk into their office and be like, hey, I'm going to compile these DLLs, put it on here, put a disclaimer that says use at your own risk. We're not responsible if this fucks up something and crashes your game.
Well, it's the same disclaimer they
say, hey,
slap
guys, here's a tool.
Yeah.
You don't have to use a version of 3ds Max that requires you to go on CG peers to acquire it now.
Yeah,
And
it's so insane that you actually do have to like you can't even get 2011 anymore. You have to get
yeah,
pirate it if you want to get 3ds Max 2011. There was some post on somewhere, I can't remember. I think it was like the Blizzard Battle.net forums, which is always a great place to go if you're looking for insightful commentary. And one of the posts there was like, "Why is Blizzard encouraging piracy?" Question mark. Or might have actually been on the subreddit. I think it was probably the subreddit. But either way, it was some insane post where it was like, clearly Blizzard is encouraging piracy because they won't release their they refuse to release their updated tools, and the only tools that they have are for 2011, and you can't get that unless you pirate. It's like I understand what the point the guy's making, but I think it's just laziness. I don't think it's like maliciousness. You know what I mean?
yeah. It's like the editor that StarCraft 2 uses was compiled last minute. It's made out of net. It performs terribly. It's disorganized because most of their shit was done in XML. The Tyrannid editor was what they used, but their data was all done in XML.
Right.
I don't know about their triggers. Maybe that was built in there too. But it all performs like shit, so I can't even fathom them using that editor. But this is Blizzard, so who knows? Maybe they are masochists. They have actually complained about their internal tools in the past, as far back as Diablo 2. There is on record interviews of them saying that their tools were awful and they didn't want to fix them, so they just kept wasting more and more and more and more time over and over and over again.
Yeah, it was Diablo 2, and I think you mentioned this last time we talked about World of Warcraft. There was something you mentioned about World of Warcraft specifically having some problem.
World of Warcraft, they've mentioned a few times that their shit's a mess and the engine's a mess and they can't do X or Y because everything's a mess, and they just don't want to sit down and fix it. But with StarCraft 2, it's more malicious than that. It's like they have no respect at all for custom content whatsoever. They've never interacted with us unless they say, you have to cease and desist this because it breaks some copyright. Now, before StarCraft 2, that was if you called your project a campaign. Or in the case of Infoceptor's StarCraft to Warcraft mod, if they think it's competition. They shut that down because they think it was going to compete with Warcraft 3. And so they just come up with some bullshit excuse, and what are you going to do? Because you're already breaking the end-user license agreement and everything related by making a mod. You really have no power whatsoever. If you make a mod for a game, the developer owns everything you put in there. It's theirs. You can't legally fight them. So if they say you stop this, unless you go underground or whatever, like a lot of people have done. But with StarCraft 2, it's even more stupid because it's like they just acknowledge that there will be people who probably want to make stuff for this game, but we're not going to do anything to help them. We're just going to make an editor, and we're going to say this game has an editor because it adds a feature bullet point they can put on their advertising. So I knew an individual who was within StarCraft 2's development during Alpha, and he was directly related to the editor team. And I think he was just quality assurance at that stage, but he was an individual from the modding community. We had extensive talks about it, and he had created a mock-up, if you will, like a concept of an interface for the editor. And everything, we went back and forth on it and talked about stuff. And basically the same kind of thing I did with Brood Killer back when making data edit. And, this was most certainly at some point handed to Blizzard staff. And I've talked to Blizzard staff through third and first parties in the past. Quantum, I don't know if you're aware of who he is, but he knows someone in Blizzard. He actually knew several people in Blizzard that we got into talks with and forwarded information to, very much to the same extent. Everything that I've mentioned here, like the editor and AI and stuff, I've had information given to Blizzard at least like a half dozen times throughout the years, directly. So it's not like people in the company are unaware of, what people want, what people have problems with, all this sort of stuff. They don't actually care.
It's the immortal quote, right? That's what was it? It was that quote where you had from one of the lead developers of Warcraft 3. It was like the lead, Brett Wood. It was him, and he said,
aware of the problems that you have described, and we will do nothing about them yet. I posted a post during, I think on the day the Frozen Throne came out, about, I went through a list of like the AI problems, because Frozen Throne's melee AI was a massive step backwards from melee, and there's a lot of other issues I pointed out as well. And Brett Wood's like, oh, we're aware of all this, we're not going to do anything about it. That's the only time I ever actually had Blizzard themselves directly reply to me on that. I talked to people who claimed to be CMs and stuff in Mapster's IRC, but when I think back, I think that they were just shells that were hired to try to placate people who are complaining on their forum, because they all agreed with everything I said. We had long, extensive talks with all these people who had these Blizzard tags on them, and nothing ever came from it because people just don't give a shit. And You don't need even me to tell you that, because you just look at the art tools. It took them 4 fucking years to publish the same plugin they have used for however many years. And you can't even make the excuse that it took 4 years to make documentation for it, because they have internal documentation. They tell people who use a fucking thing, and the documentation they gave you was incomplete and half-assed anyways.
Yeah, well, they didn't ship it with the actual documentation, is my understanding.
Yeah. Well, it has documentation, just not very much. Admittedly, more than what the editor has, but still, not very much. And the thing is, you're not obligated to provide a documentation for it, especially when you're making an update. So the fact you still haven't seen this newer version of the tools come out that has existed forever, it has a lens flare system, it has a cloth system, and all this other stuff. The fact you still haven't seen that is just like, it's just disrespect. They don't give a shit. And on one hand, I can understand, maybe you don't want to release something because nobody's doing anything with it. But at the same time, if you want to encourage growth, if you actually gave a shit about custom content, if they were actually serious about the marketplace they were talking about as recently as during StarCrafts, they would do something to facilitate that growth. But that's how little they give a shit.
There's an element of it that
control of everything.
There's an element of it that does feel like smoke and mirrors in some cases, because they talk about how they want to promote arcade growth or whatever. Like they have this like spotlight shit, and I think
there's a great way.
Yeah, well, there was an element that they were focusing on where they spotlit StarCraft's back when it first came out, right? So you were involved in the development of that, so you know more about that than I do.
And there was talks of the marketplace being used with this. Never heard of that ever again. And they featured it during BlizzCon as well. There was a show match between, forget the names, was a Stork and someone else. I can't remember, but it was really funny because that show match, you had to use special maps for this. And the show match, the minerals were unbalanced on it. One of the bases had too few. And that was a player who lost too. So, it was unbalanced. Nobody ever asked HKS and I to look those over. Nobody ever really quality assured their maps. There was no final QA test or anything for that. It just got thrown at them. I really have a lot of amusing stories about that, but it's after that happened, it all went silent on both ends, development and on Blizzard's end. And Blizzard was already really hard to get a hold of. We waited months and months and months and months to get anything from them. But I mean, you did get the art tools, which we ended up not needing. I forget why we got a hold of that, but it was a mess. They featured that, and it seemed like Blizzard kind of may have wanted to take that forward and use it, because there was talks about selling skins and stuff for this, and that never manifested. It's hard to make conjecture because I wasn't the one directly dealing with this stuff. I only heard things. And from what it really sounded like is Blizzard wants to do things, but they don't actually want to put the energy into doing it. So, or there's something legally tying their hands and they can't go forward with the marketplace. And as far as Blizzard is concerned, the only thing to come out of arcade was money. They wanted to do the whole Valve thing. They wanted to monetize people's shit and make microtransactions out of it, and for some reason they weren't able to do that. I actually genuinely think that their software just couldn't support it. They are so fucking bad at programming, it is unfathomable. And I mean, look at Diablo 3's Real Money Auction House. That was a shit show. You can reset your auction timer by just locally changing your system clock. That's bad. This is really, really bad if you're trying to legitimately restrict how much shit you can put up there. And they were missing out on all the big sales anyways because of their limitations. People went to eBay and sold shit on eBay for over 1,000 euros. Utterly absurd. Blizzard got no cut of that. So, I'm pretty sure technology and the lack of competence on their behalf is a big reason why the arcade marketplace never happened. It's really for the best, though. StarCraft 2 is better off having died, predictably, than having become something, having become the monster that is, Valve. And kind of people that StarCraft 2 attracted by promise of money were just all universally shitters. All these people just jumped ship the second any promise of money vanished, because they were not going to be in it for making quality content. They just wanted to make a quick buck out of making Dota before people caught on.
I mean, it I don't quite get the idea that I've never sought to monetize my custom content. Like I never thought that was the way I was going to make my money. But there were like the whole paid mods thing that was going on, right? So that happened in Steam.
That's a thing now. That's actually a thing.
Yeah, it's only for Skyrim though, or something. It's only for select titles,
So the
right?
way that works, if you're interested in knowing how that works,
Sure.
Basically, it's no longer paid mods. Modders are contracted like interns. They do something, and then it is owned by Bethesda, and then Bethesda sells it. They are paid on a contract, and then they're not paid any royalties. So basically, while you probably make a better lump sum by doing it up front than you would by selling a mod, your product is being sold for an insane amount. Like, I think I saw a sword being sold for like $5 or $10. So that's insane. And you are not getting a cut out of that anymore. So you got paid probably a reasonable, it was described as a reasonable, I don't know how much, but a reasonable sum when you make the initial, contract. But now it's Bethesda selling your product. And then you're no longer in the contract. So it's like outsourcing interns. So basically, Bethesda found a way to get the cheapest microtransaction system possible without ever having to pay any royalties. So it basically turned cancer into Ebola.
I don't understand how how did they figure that out? How did people sign up for that though? With Valve,
people are greedy. They want money.
With Valve and the CS:GO,
they make a hobby that they should be paid for it.
Right, but even with CS:GO skins, for example, there's a heavy element of like you get paid a certain percentage for what those skins sell for. Like there's like some percentage of it. Makes sense. You know what I mean? So like I'm surprised that people allowed that to happen.
What are they going to do about it? Daddy says you're going to do this, you're going to do this, and people are greedy enough. They think that because they have a hobby that they should be paid for it, and then apologists think that just because someone worked on something, they should be paid for it. So, once you get down that road, it is slippery. It is like Billy's gullet, and then you start slipping, and then suddenly, people think it's okay to have loot boxes, where you can invest $1,000 and not even get anything. Like it's all interrelated. It's really all interrelated. It's in large part to people having no standards. People pay like $70 for some piece of shit thrown up in Unity with a bunch of, middleware that doesn't even work correctly. People put stuff on Steam that's like Hunt Down the Free Man. You can't even finish the game without using NoClip. Absolute fucking disaster end to end.
That's a released product?
That's a released product. I was watching a guy stream it a couple days ago, actually. It was absolute train wreck. People pay for this. It goes on Steam. There's no standards whatsoever. So what sets the standard is what are people willing to pay for. And whales are really willing to pay for much of anything. They pay just to pay. Like I said, there's people who open loot boxes just to open loot boxes. Go on YouTube right now, look up Overwatch loot box and despair.
Yeah, well, not only are people they're actually getting paid to buy those things in the first place. It's just that CS:GO
people
gambling.
Pay them on their stream or whatever, and they're like, "Hey, open some loot boxes." It doesn't make it any less cancerous.
I don't understand why would they not just, if they're gonna spend money anyways, they don't even want to spend the money to open it themselves. They want to watch somebody else open it.
Like I said,
that's like actually getting cucked by version of loot boxes.
This is
so insane.
Like, I'm watching this guy stream, right?
Yeah.
So I'm watching this guy play Hunt Down the Free Man. There's some guy who's using his stream donation input to send messages to him. And every time he does so, he pays $5.
Yeah.
So I start watching, he's paid $90 already. By the end of the stream, he's racked up $200.
Just to send this guy messages.
Just to put messages on the screen for like 2 or 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Like,
that happens, man.
Like, on one hand, you can think, okay, people got their money, they can spend it however they want, right? Like, who am I to dictate how they're going to spend their money? But the thing is this sets a standard that affects everybody. Because if people are willing to throw, however many hundreds of thousands of dollars into a developer, and other developers see that and they produce shit that just tries to milk these retards of money, it affects me because I want a quality product, and I'm not going to get a quality product because nobody feels encouraged to make quality products anymore, because that's not what makes you the big bucks. So it's a big,
is toxic. Yeah, it's a big knock-on effect that goes beyond the like the casual getting appeased as soon as they walk in the door and spend their money. I mean, the streaming stuff is pretty crazy. Like, I don't know how. I don't know. There must be a lot more money out there in the world than I thought, man. Because people can just throw away $200 on one guy.
It's ridiculous. I don't know how these people get their money. They must really like sucking dick.
I mean, it's that retail. That's that corporate lifestyle that gives you a lot of disposable income, apparently. But you just have to sell your soul. Dick. Yeah, you just have to sell your soul. Or your lips. Well, that's probably as good a place as any to end tonight's podcast. I'm sure we'll be back at some point next week if you're around. If we're both not. If we're both still in our houses,
we're not engaged in an epic World of Warcraft engagement.
Yeah, if we're not lost on World of Warcraft, then I don't know. But
like I said, somebody has bankrolled an extension for this recording. So once I get everything all set up, I'm gonna dive head first in there. I'm gonna talk about the writing. It's gonna be a real hoot.
I can't wait. So
it's gonna be good, boys.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, that's good places I need to leave. Promise of additional adventures in World of Warcraft. It's so exciting.
Better smoke that weed.
Absolutely.